News of the Times. British True Crime Real Murders of the 1920s. A crime compilation. Welcome to News of the Times and our end of month crime compilation. They are the shadows that linger behind locked doors, the whispers beneath polite society, and the faces that vanished long before justice ever arrived. From a dazzling stage star who disappeared without a trace, to a pale hand beckoning from a Suffolk pond, to a midnight fire that concealed a mother's final breath. These are the forgotten horrors of interwar Britain. In this special compilation, we bring together 7 true crime cases from 1919 to 1929, tales of murder, deceit and betrayal, and the relentless search for truth. Each one leaves behind a question that still echoes through time. What really happened? Case 1. 1919. The vanishing of Mamie Stuart, a cold case solved too late. She was a rising stage star with a dazzling smile until she vanished from a Welsh village in 1919. A hidden suitcase, a violent husband, and no body, until 42 years later, when 3 boys stumbled on a skeleton deep in a mineshaft. What really happened to Mamie Stuart? Case 2. 1920. The Beckoning Hand, a Suffolk horror. A pale hand suffered from a Suffolk pond, silent, lifeless, and beckoning. 13-year-old Edith Howes had vanished. What followed was a case that rattled post-war Britain and placed her father at the centre of a national horror. Case 3. 1920. Buried beneath the shingle, the Crumbles murder of Irene Munro. When a boy stumbled over a human foot on a shingle beach in Eastbourne, the case that followed would spark national outrage. A respectable young woman, a shattered jaw, and a web of lies that led all the way to the gallows. Case 4. The 1923 go-kart murder, death in a bundle. The killing of John Johnson and the last woman hanged in Glasgow. A 13-year-old boy vanished after selling newspapers. By morning, his body was found trussed in a blanket, wheeled through Glasgow in a child's go-kart. The woman pushing it, Susan Newell, and what her 8-year-old daughter told the court would shock the entire nation. Case 5. The Butcher of the Crumbles, the murder of Emily Kaye, 1924. A seaside affair, a blood-stained bungalow, and a smiling killer with a suitcase full of secrets. The murder of Emily Kaye shocked Britain and gave birth to modern forensic science. Case 6. The Blackmail, the Bungalow, and Madam X, the untold murder mystery of 1929. A seaside scream, a vanished fortune, and a woman known only as Madam X. Was Kate Jackson a blackmailer, a novelist, or something far more dangerous? The truth died with her, but the questions never did. Case 7. The Margate Hotel Murder, the sinister schemes of Sidney Fox, 1929. A grieving son, a midnight fire, and a mother insured for thousands just one day before her death. What became as a tragedy soon revealed a far darker truth. Welcome to the chilling mystery of Room 66. So, draw the curtains, check your life insurance policies aren't too generous, and settle in with a nice cup of tea, preferably not served by a suspicious relative. You're in for 7 tales of twisted crimes, seaside scandals, and a vanishing respectability. Let's begin. Case 1. The vanishing of Mamie Stuart. A cold case solved too late. A true crime of 1919. She was young, dazzling and determined, a chorus girl turned headliner who dared to bare her knees on stage in an era that still clutched its pearls but behind the show lights and feathered fans. Mamie Stuart was entangled in a far more dangerous performance, one in which her co-star was a violent, controlling man with secrets far darker than anyone imagined. When Mamie vanished without a trace from a remote Welsh village in the winter of 1919, suspicions swirled. A suitcase full of shredded clothing, a locked cottage, and a husband with another wife all pointed towards foul play. Yet, with no body and no proof, the case grew cold, and her supposed husband walked free after serving time only for bigamy. It would take over 40 years, a rusted mineshaft, and 3 curious boys to finally uncover the truth. This is the story of Mamie Stuart, the dancing girl who disappeared, the lies that buried her, and the case that proved some secrets refused to stay hidden.
The victim. Amy Stuart was born in Sunderland in 1893. Amy was passionate about dancing and the stage and began touring the vaudeville circuits as a chorus girl at the age of 15 with her parents' permission. From here, Amy took on the stage name of Mamie. Over time, Amy, now Mamie, created her own dance troupe called the 5 Verona Girls. Her troupe had moderate success with gigs across England. The troupe of girls were somewhat more racy than other dance troupes of the day. The girls were known to expose their legs up to the knee height as part of their act. In 1917, the 5 Verona Girls disbanded due to pregnancy and injury within the troupe. Mamie returned to her home in Sunderland, and she was 23 years old. It is here she met George Shotton, proclaimed widower, a marine surveyor. Theirs was a whirlwind romance, with Shotton presenting Mamie with a ring within months of their meeting each other. The two married in March 1918, moving to various places before finally settling down in the remote cottage in the Welsh village of Tai Llanwyd. After the initial honeymoon phase, the marriage, by all accounts, was an unhappy one for Mamie. Shotton had a violent temper and was a controlling man. Regular correspondence from Mamie to her family depicted a controlling, highly jealous man who she described as odd and not all there. There are indications in her letters that Mamie is considering leaving Shotton and returning home. The last letter from Mamie that was received by her family is dated the 12th of November 1912. Her family never verifiably heard from her again. George Shotton. Shotton was born in 1880 and worked as a marine surveyor. He was described as slight in stature with thick curly hair and a pencil-thin moustache. Unbeknownst to Mamie, Shotton was already married to Mary Leader from 1905, with whom he had a son, Arthur, making his marriage to Mamie in 1918 bigamous, and Shotton and Mamie not legally married. His household, with first wife Mary and son Arthur, was located in Penarth, some 2 miles away from the outskirt cottage in which he had set up a second home with Mamie. Shotton was believed to travel quite a bit for his job, which explained his long disappearances away from both households. Mary Shotton spoke frequently of Shotton's violent temper and physical abuse, accusations hinted by Mamie in her letters to her family. Neither wife knew of the other. The disappearance. Mamie was last seen in December in Swansea. Hearsay evidence given from the Shotton cottage landlady indicated that Mamie had told her she was leaving to go to Sunderland, where her parents lived, shortly before she disappeared. Was Mamie leaving her violent supposed husband for good? Her letter dated the 12th of November indicated her increasingly unhappiness with the marriage to Shotton in a secluded cottage far from family, friends and social life. Mamie then just vanishes. Mamie's parents, now increasingly concerned about their daughter, contact the police. In March 1920, the ubiquitous leather trunk is noted having been left unclaimed for 3 months at the Swansea Grosvenor Hotel. The trunk had been left by a male guest in December 1919. Upon opening the trunk, 2 women's dresses and a pair of shoes extensively cut up, some jewellery, a manicure set and a slip of paper with the name and address of Mamie's parents were found in the trunk. Police were called in, who contacted Mamie's parents, now in a real terror for the safety of their daughter. The search was on for Mamie. From the Daily Mirror, the 1st of June 1920, the premonitions of vanished dancer, clothed in shreds, mysterious police find a hotel portmanteau. Where is Mamie Stuart? This is a problem which, for the moment, completely baffles the police of the county, and particularly those in this town. Miss Stuart, the daughter of a Sunderland sea captain and a charming and talented young woman, vanished from Swansea in July last year, 1919, and has never been seen or heard of since. She came to Swansea 2 years ago from Sunderland and stayed at a local hotel and also at Trafalgar Terrace, Swansea, and Newton Mumbles. She is 26 years of age and went about freely in the company of a man who was regarded as her husband. Torn clothing in a bag. The police have recovered a portmanteau left at a local hotel in which 2 dresses and boots belonging to Miss Stuart were found torn or cut to pieces. The police are totally at a loss to know what has become of Miss Stuart, who, being a talented dancer, pianist and vocalist, was a great favourite amongst all of whom she came into contact. It is stated that she had not been in Swansea since last July. On one occasion she told the landlady in Trafalgar Terrace that if ever she was missing, the landlady must search for her. The landlady told her not to be silly, but now recalls the request as significant. Miss Stuart was regarded here as a young married woman, the couple being known as Mr. and Mrs. Shotton. The police expressed complete ignorance of her movements since she left Swansea, but are following up every clue. Parents fear foul play. Miss Stuart's parents fear that their daughter has met her death under mysterious circumstances. My daughter, said Captain Stuart, has been alive, would I am sure have communicated with us. She wrote every week up to the time her letters ceased. Mammie's sister also fears the worst. She does not think her sister is at all likely, owing to the disappointment over her marriage, to decide voluntarily to give up all connection with her friends. She was not at all secretive in her manner. All her letters were frank and open, and when at home she never went without chatting about where she was going. Sunderland police consider that the silence of the girl has a sinister significance. Shotton was traced and investigated, but he revealed nothing. The cottage in which they lived Shotton, having moved back with his first wife sometime around the disappearance of Mamie, was duly picked over forensically with a view to finding any clue to Mamie's disappearance or potentially her body. Within the cottage, Mamie's leather handbag was found hidden behind a dresser in the bedroom. It still contained approximately £2 and her sugar ration card, but no trace of a body was found. Despite tremendous efforts by the police, Mamie's body remained undiscovered. Shotton was by far considered the primary suspect in Mamie's disappearance, but without a body, Shotton could not be tried for her murder. From the Daily Mirror, the 10th of February 1923. Vanished without a clue. Disappearance followed by bigamy, charge against surveyor. Mamie Stuart vanished in December 1919, leaving no trace of her existence save a portmanteau containing 2 of her dresses and some boots cut to pieces, which were discovered in a Swansea hotel in May 1920. 9 months after Mamie's disappearance, George Shotton, a marine surveyor of Caswell Bay, Swansea, was convicted of bigamously marrying the girl. In the course of the trial, the evidence showed that Mamie Stuart, who is said to have been on the stage at the time, was alive and in the Swansea district to the beginning of December 1919, and that there was nothing to show that she had ever left the neighbourhood. Last letter. She left her home in the north the previous month and wrote to her parents from an address near Swansea, a small house in the centre of a busy little village, to the effect that she was in a great big house away from everyone for miles. In reply to that letter, Mammie's parents wrote to her at the address she gave, and a few days later their letter was returned through the dead letter office marked House Closed. This was the last they ever heard of her. It is said that she visited London several times before she went to Swansea. For months, the Swansea police worked unceasingly to discover the whereabouts of the vanished girl, who lived in the mystery house, as it became known, of the little Welsh village. Clues. Then, of course, the possibility of her having been murdered and her body disposed of in some way was also considered. Part of the flooring of a house was removed when a new tenant went in, and a considerable part of the garden was dug up, but nothing was found. Without a body, Shotton was placed on trial instead on the charge of bigamy. This was an open and shut case, as the marriage licenses for both marriages were easily traceable. Shotton's defence was that he had extended kindness to Mamie Stuart, but had not married her, and that the signature on the marriage licence was not his. From the Daily Mirror, July 28, 1920, 18 months sentence ends bigamy trial. Collapse in dock. Today, in a packed court, George Shotton, the 40-year-old marine surveyor, told the story of his associations with Mamie Stuart, the missing Sunderland girl. Shotton emphatically denied the charge that he bigamously married Mamie on March the 25th in 1918 at South Shields. The jury, however, found him guilty, and he was sentenced to 18 months hard labour. On hearing the sentence, the prisoner collapsed in the dock. The judge said the sentence would have been much lighter but for the prisoner's wicked perjury. With Shotton in jail and no body found, the disappearance of Mamie Stuart became a cold case. From the Daily Mirror, the 29th of September 1920. End of hunt for Mamie Stuart. After a 9-month search, Swansea police have definitely abandoned the hunt for Mamie Stuart, who, last heard of in Swansea in September last year, disappeared so mysteriously. Police inquiries have been most thorough, including the questioning of certain people in Canada who knew the girl. Shotton's release. Upon Shotton's release from prison in 1922, he eventually ended up in South London, living with his mother, finding work in a number of odd jobs. His long-suffering first wife, Mary, successfully divorced him. His infamous temper seems not to have diminished, as he is arrested in May 1938 for threatening his sister and causing her bodily harm. Shotton died penniless in 1958 in Bristol in a home for the elderly. Mamie's body found. In November 1961, 3 boys on the track of a hoped-for treasure trove discovered a body grinning back at them from 50 feet down a ventilation shaft. The corpse still had some scraps of clothing, jewellery, and tufts of brown hair. From the Birmingham Daily Post, the 1st of December 1961. Bones sawn in two. The skeleton was found by 3 potholers in a disused lead mine. Officers of the Home Office Forensic Science Laboratory at Cardiff have been engaged in the reconstruction of the bones to prepare a report for the inquest and in an attempt to establish the cause of death. The skeleton was in many parts. It had been suggested that some of the bones had been sawn in two. Bristol police have informed Glamorgan police that they have found a woman who is believed to have last seen Mamie Stuart a year before she disappeared. It is understood that she has identified a 3-stone engagement ring and a thick gold wedding ring found near the skeleton as belonging to Mamie Stuart. Forensic pathology, dental records, and remaining items found on the body identifies as belonging to Mamie all concluded that the cut-up body found was indeed that of the missing Mamie Stuart of 42 years previously. The shaft where the body had been found was approximately 200 yards from the isolated cottage she had shared with Shotton. Shotton had died 3 years before, by all accounts alone and penniless. An inquest was held where it was concluded that Mamie had been murdered sometime in November to December 1919, and that her bigamous husband was, most likely, her murderer. The cold case was solved, but there was no justice meted out by the law.
Case 2, The Beckoning Hand, a Suffolk horror from 1920. It began with a ripple, a motion on the surface of a quiet, shaded pond near Corton in Suffolk. On a Saturday in late May 1920, a group of schoolboys set out to fish and instead stumbled upon a scene that would chill the country, a pale hand reaching from the water as if to beckon. The hand belonged to 13-year-old Edith Elizabeth Howes. What followed was a case as horrifying as it was tragic, not merely for the brutal violation and the drowning of a child, but for the identity of the man soon accused of the crime. William John Howes, a war-scarred veteran and the girl's own father, was charged with her murder. In an era struggling to reckon with the unseen wounds of war, Howe's trial exposed more than just one family's darkness. It raised uncomfortable questions about madness, trauma, and the limits of justice in post-war Britain.
From the Daily Herald, the 1st of July 1920, The Beckoning Hand. Young girl's body found floating in a pond. Suffolk mystery. Some schoolboys who had gone to fish on Saturday in a lonely, tree-shadowed pond near Corton, a village just north of Lowestoft, were startled to see a hand protruding from the water. Seized with horror, they rushed from the scene to the neighbouring village. There they found the constable named Bickers, who, on hearing the story, hastened to the spot with the boys, following timidly behind. When he reached the pond, the policeman saw that the boys had been telling the truth, and that a hand was indeed apparent above the placid and desolate waters in an attitude of ghastly beckoning. Summoning up his courage, he caught hold of the ice-cold fingers and brought to light the body of a young girl that apparently had been floating a little below the surface of the water. Body identified. Inquiries that were quickly set on foot soon resulted in the body being identified as that of Edith Elizabeth Howes, an attractive girl of 13, who had been living with her parents at 2 Factory Street in Lowestoft. It soon became evident that death was due to violence, and the report by the police surgeon stated that the girl had been outraged previously to death. At the inquest on the girl, which was opened here this afternoon, a girl named Emma Ellen Tuttle gave evidence of identification and said that she last saw Edith Howes at 9:20 on Saturday morning walking along the Corton Road with her father, about 1.5 miles from the scene of the tragedy. Coroner and father. The father was present at the inquest, and on the advice of the coroner he reserved his cross-examination of the witness. The only other evidence was that given by the police, who described the recovery of the body, and the inquest was adjourned until June the 21st in order to allow the police to complete their investigation. The pond where the body was found is in a field almost opposite Corton Pleasure Gardens, which once belonged to Coleman, the Mustard King, a thickly wooded garden of great extent. The pond is almost entirely screened from observation from the main road and has steeply sloping banks. This brutal attack shocked the public and made national headlines. It was not just the murder, it was the outrage, violation itself, which added to the highly grim nature of the crime. This shock was heightened to disbelief when the girl's own father became the primary suspect. From the Yarmouth Independent, 5th of June 1920. There was a sensational development in connection with the girl's death when on Wednesday William Howes, aged 40, her father, was charged at Lowestoft Police Court with murdering his daughter. Evidence which was only formal was given by Superintendent Newson that the prisoner, when asked to account for his movements, could not do so satisfactorily. A post-mortem on the girl's body revealed the fact that she had been outraged, probably stunned, and put into the water alive, the cause of death being drowning. Prisoner was seen to part from his daughter at Duke's Head Street, Lowestoft, on the morning of the tragedy, and evidence had been obtained that he was seen near the spot on Corton Road with the girl on the morning when this affair took place. About William John Howes. Howes was a decorated soldier who had served in the Boer War and had seen action in Lewes and Ypres during the Great War. Howes had been blown up in Ypres and was known to suffer from trembling of his limbs, insomnia and weakness. He had been given a medical discharge on the 30th of August 1918. Investigations by police discovered some disturbing stories of the Howes household. In February 1920, 13-year-old Edith was sent on a bus to Kessingland on a Saturday night. She was found there alone and crying and returned to her family by police. Before she was found, Howes had reported her missing to the local police, although he had placed her on the bus. In hindsight, this begged the question of whether Howes had been pre-staging the scene of the murder to come. Howes had been married 3 times and had 2 daughters aged 13 and 11 whom lived with him. His 3rd wife left him on the 7th of May 1920 and reported being afraid of him. Howes had complained that she was trying to poison him and that she had given him syphilis. Both accusations were medically proven to be untrue. The history and family background of Howes, as well as the physical and mental frailty, which was very apparent to all, played a part in the decision that was to come. From the Daily News, London, the 3rd of June 1920. At the brief hearing at the police court today, Howes gave the appearance of a neurotic. He was trembling from head to foot, and this was explained by the fact that he had sustained shell shock at the front. He clearly declared that he was not guilty. Superintendent Newson said although the prisoner had declared to them that he parted with the girl in the main street at 10 a.m., he was seen with her near the pond at a later hour. Burial. There was a pathetic scene at the local cemetery this afternoon when the funeral of the dead girl took place. It was attended by a large number of school children. Howes was remanded as investigations proceeded. When asked to give his movements on the critical day, Howes stated he was at the market when the crime took place. No corroborating evidence could be found to support his statement. Instead, the police managed to collect 20 witnesses, placing Howes at the scene of the crime during the murder window. His trousers were also seen to be wet when he arrived back home, and there were scratches upon his face which he had no explanation of. From the Daily Herald, the 9th of July, 1920. Girl dead in pond. Verdict against father. A coroner's jury at Lowestoft today returned a verdict of wilful murder against William John Howes, aged 40, fisherman, the body of whose daughter, aged 13, was recovered from a pond in Corton on May the 29th. A post-mortem examination, it was stated, showed that the girl had been violated, stunned and thrown into the pond. Howes was seen in the vicinity of the pond in the girl's company, and later it was noticed that his face was scratched and bleeding. Asked if he would like to give evidence, Howe replied, "I've nothing to say except what I told Detectives White and McCraw." The coroner said the main point was that Howes told the police that during the critical hours of 10 till 12 he was on at the market. There was no evidence of this, but there was evidence that he was in the vicinity of the pond at that time. The trial took place and Howes was found guilty. Between 20 witnesses proving his being in the vicinity of the crime during the critical hours, the clear discrepancies with his statements, his wet trousers and the scratches on his face, the finding of towels in the house containing a mixture of blood and emissions, Howes had little defence. Even with the horrific brutality imposed on his own daughter, the jury was sympathetic, as Howes was plainly a broken man. From the Aberdeen Press and Journal, 28th of October 1920, death sentence on fisherman. William John Howes, 42, fisherman of Lowestoft, was sentenced to death at Suffolk Assizes yesterday for the murder of his daughter, aged 13. The girl was found dead in a pond with injuries to her head. She had been outraged. The jury recommended the prisoner to mercy on account of his physical and mental condition, and the judge said their recommendation would be forwarded to the proper quarter. Interestingly, in this case that would have normally topped the papers, much of the trial is not covered in the papers. We suspect, due to government influence, Howes was clearly suffering shell shock, or PTSD, from the war. Stories of soldiers suffering PTSD were downplayed in general in the press. With the conviction and the appeal for mercy from the jury, the case is brought before the Home Secretary, who grants a reprieve to Howes. Howes is placed in an insane asylum to stay there for as long as His Majesty's pleasure. From the Western Times, the 16th of November 1920. Murderer reprieved. William John Howes, the Lowestoft fisherman who was to have been executed for the murder of his young daughter, has been reprieved with a view to his removal to an asylum. William John Howes was sent to Broadmoor Asylum for the criminally insane, and he died in 1943.
Case 3. Buried beneath the shingle, the Crumbles murder of Irene Munro in 1920. Holiday, horror, and a trail of lies. When a 19-year-old Irene Munro left London for her first seaside holiday alone, she was looking for quiet walks and coastal air, not notoriety. 4 days later, her battered body was discovered hastily buried in the shingle of Eastbourne's lonely Crumbles. What followed was a case that shocked the nation. A pretty, respectable girl found brutalised and dead. 2 young men with military pasts spinning a crumbling web of lies, and a defence led by one of England's most brilliant barristers up against a mountain of damning witness testimony. It was a case soaked in sensation, and one that would end on the gallows.
The Crumbles is the term Crumbles in the context of Eastbourne refers to the Eastbourne Crumbles, which is an area of coastal erosion and cliffs along the English Channel in Eastbourne, East Sussex in England. A geological treasure trove, the Eastbourne location was and still is a popular vacation spot featuring a long shingle beach by the sea. Crumbles Murder 1. The murder of Irene Munro. Pretty, accomplished 19-year-old Irene Munro, a typist in London, was having her first holiday on her own. She had the option to holiday with her mother in Edinburgh, but had chosen instead to spend her fortnight holiday by the seaside. The landlady of the cottage she rented from spoke of how she had warmed to Irene, a quiet girl with moderate habits, who would usually spend the morning going for a walk and would be back to the cottage no later than 9 p.m. We start the investigation with reports from the landlady of the rented cottage regarding the missing and finding of Irene. From The Guardian, the 23rd of August, 1920. Eastbourne Mystery. According to Mrs. Winiat, the young woman was of a very respectable appearance and tidily dressed. She appeared to the landlady to be the usual type of honest London business girl. Miss Munro's movements. The story so far as to Mrs. Winiat can carry it was that Miss Munro called at her house first on Monday afternoon, but there was no accommodation and she arranged to come back the next day. She arrived at about 10:30 on Tuesday morning and had breakfast. She seemed a very nice young woman, Mrs. Winiat told a press representative, of decent appearance and looked perfectly respectable. Her movements while she was with me were those of an ordinary visitor. She came to meals regularly and she had no callers. Referring to several letters which arrived for Miss Munro, Mrs. Winiat said that one came from Scotland and another bore the postmark of South Kensington. On Thursday, she went out between 2 and 3 o'clock in the afternoon, saying that she was out going for a walk to Hampton Park. She didn't return. I waited up for her until after midnight. On Friday, there was no sign of her. I did not know what to do. I thought she might come along during the day. And then we opened a letter which had come for her from Edinburgh, and found it was from her mother at Portobello. We intended sending a telegram to her mother on Saturday morning, when we saw in the local paper an announcement that the body of a young woman had been found on the Crumbles. The reported body found on the beach tied in with the unusual disappearance of her lodger, who had been a quiet girl of regular habits. From the Daily Herald, the 12th of October 1920. Mrs. Wynyatt, with whom the girl was staying at 393 Seaside Estates, said that she was of a quiet disposition and seemed very much depressed on the day of the tragedy. She came to stay with her on Tuesday, August the 17th, from London, and said she was all alone, her mother having gone to Edinburgh. She usually went out every morning, returning at about 1:30 p.m. On the Thursday, she went out about 2 o'clock and said she was going to Hampton Park, which is only 1¼ miles from her lodgings. She failed to return in the evening, and the police were communicated with. Several letters for the girl from Kensington, where her mother lives, and Edinburgh, and a registered package containing money she had asked for from her mother, arrived in the morning following her disappearance. The next day, a young boy, having a picnic with his mother on the shingle beach nearby, fell over a foot sticking up out of the ground. Boy's discovery. Nothing more was seen or heard of Miss Munro until little Willie Weller, who had been picnicking on the Crumbles with his mother on Friday, August the 20th, stumbled across the girl's feet in a hole in the ground. There are a number of depressions all along the Crumbles, the boy stated, only the feet were protruding. He ran back and informed Mr. Land, the occupier of the house in which they were staying. Mr. Land went to the place and dug the body out, later calling the police. The girl, whose face was so badly disfigured as to be almost unrecognizable, was dressed in a black straw hat, black shoes and stockings, and a long green coat trimmed in black fur on the cuffs and around the hem. The spot where the body was found lies midway between the cliffs and the road in Eastbourne and Pevensey, and is composed of pebbles and long grass. At night it is a lonely spot. There are 3 old watchtowers, one inhabited, about 200 yards away. Police were called to the scene to discover the highly battered face of a young girl only recently buried within the shingle beach. The face of the victim had been so badly disfigured almost to the extent of being unrecognizable. The teeth were missing, and there were punctures on the mouth and forehead and by the left ear. There was no doubt that the case was one of murder, as the wounds could not have been self-inflicted. Witnesses were called forth to try to identify the body. Mrs. Wynyatt, the landlady, stated, "I could not recognize her features as they were so badly knocked about, but I knew at once the green coat she had been wearing with the deep fur upon it." Investigating the scene, the police initially thought Irene had been shot with the puncture wounds found on her face. However, A bloody brick nearby soon became identified as the murder weapon. The medical autopsy revealed the horrific nature of the wounds that Irene had sustained. Pretty girl buried in shingle, murdered whilst on holiday alone. Dr. Adam and Dr. Cannon, who conducted a post-mortem examination, are of the opinion that the girl who had been outraged, raped, met her death about 18 hours before the discovery, and that the death was due to wounds inflicted by a heavily blunt instrument, probably a stone. The post-mortem examination revealed that the girl's lower jaw was broken while the upper jaw was fractured. Several teeth had been broken and there were wounds on the lips and the right temple. The girl was not a maiden. It appeared that the girl had been stunned and that a blow on the left side of the face with the brick had proved fatal. Mr. Webster, the Home Office analyst, announced that there was human blood on the ironstone brick. It was thought she was murdered some little way from the place where she was found, and her body dragged along a railway track which runs near. Rusty iron bolts, shovels, nuts and metals and sleepers are lying about, and 3 small huts are near at hand. Police noted that Irene had no valuables on her upon discovery of her body. However, she was known to have some money and jewellery which she always wore. From The Guardian, the 23rd of August, 1920. Woman's body buried in sand. Eastbourne mystery. The girl carried a blue silk handbag about 9 inches long and 6 inches wide, with a plain white metal snap fastening, with a handle to pass over the arm made of the same material as the bag. She also habitually wore a 9-carat gold ring with a round cluster of 4 or 5 or 6 small brilliants or white stones. She is believed to have had between £2 and £2.10 in her possession, but the bag, ring and money cannot be found. The police are anxious to trace the 2 men described and the bag and the ring. Residents of the small area were questioned. What came out repeatedly was that Irene had been seen in the company of 2 men walking towards the Crumbles on the 19th of August in the afternoon. From The Guardian, the 21st of August 1920. Woman's body buried in sand. Police search for 2 young men. Yesterday's message from Eastbourne state that the police are still searching for 2 men who were seen walking along the high railway on the Crumbles towards Pevensey Bay between 3 and 4 o'clock on Thursday afternoon. It is assumed the murder had been then committed and the men were walking away from the scene of it. The police state that about 4 o'clock on Thursday afternoon, Miss Munro was seen walking past 393 Seaside, where she had been lodging. She was then with 2 fairly tall young men dressed in grey suits with herringbone pattern. Just before this she had come out of the house where she was staying and turned towards Eastbourne, apparently to meet these 2 men, neither of whom had a hat on. Almost immediately afterwards she came back and walked towards the Crumbles, the 3 being in conversation together. Miss Munro is stated to have been seen by several cottagers with 2 men on the road near the Crumbles between Eastbourne and Pevensey early on the evening of Thursday. It is stated that one of the men had his arm around her waist. The scene of the murder is a lonely spot. If there had been a struggle before the murder was committed, few traces, if any, would have been left in the loosed shingle. The arrest. The police made careful inquiries and finally arrested two young men, Jack Alfred Field, 19, and William Thomas Gray, 20. The former had been in the Navy. The latter man had been discharged from the Army as medically unfit. The case and its brutality were all in the papers and helped to bring witness statements forward. A conductor who knew the two local men well, a barmaid who also knew the two men, and locals who had seen the three walking together all came forward to point the police in the direction of Field and Gray, two locals who were friends with their common ex-military background. The two claimed adamantly that they were not near the Crumbles on the day of the 19th, rather that they were in Pevensey according to their statements. Police attempted to trace their alibis, only to find that their alibi was concocted. All inquiries led the police back to Field and Gray. Alibi story. The two men were released after they made a statement to the effect that they were in Pevensey with a servant girl on the afternoon of August the 19th. They accounted for their day with a wealth of detail. According to their statements, on the morning of August the 19th, they were chatting to two barmaids in a public house. In the afternoon, they were at Pevensey, where they remained until 4 o'clock. They returned to Gray's home, where they had tea prepared by the latter's wife. Afterwards, they had visited the Eastbourne Hippodrome, where Field had paid the attendant 2 shillings, which he had borrowed 3 months previously. Although at liberty, the men were clearly still a little nervous. The newspapers talked incessantly of the two men who had been last seen with the girl, and Field and Gray decided to concoct an alibi. A servant girl called Baxter went out to post a letter one evening when Gray and Field approached and asked her if they could walk home with her. She was not averse, and the trio met again. The following Monday, they went for a walk on the golf links and picked blackberries. They attempted to induce her to say that they had been with her at Pevensey on the afternoon of Thursday, August the 19th. She would not agree to do so and said, "I am afraid of getting murdered myself." The girl approached the police and told the story. In the meantime, police had been busy attempting to verify the lad's alibi statements. The police were interested in the girl's story, especially as 2 fellow servants at Baxter's testified that she did not leave the house on the afternoon of August the 18th. Powerful evidence of her identification has meanwhile come to light. Field and Gray were seen on an omnibus on the late afternoon by the conductor, who knew them both well. He saw them get off at the archway and meet a girl who wore no coat and carried a little bag. The girl had walked toward them, saying, "Hello, Jack." He identified the girl with a photograph of Irene Munro. A labourer also came forward with valuable evidence. He was sitting in a railway hut near the Crumbles when he saw a girl pass with 2 young men. One of them carried a yellow-coloured stick with a dog's head on it, such as a stick was later found in Field's house. With the preponderance of evidence accumulated from witness statements, the attempted concocted alibi story, the newfound riches they seemed to have whilst unusually without any funds, and the discovered physical evidence of the walking stick, the case went to trial. Marshall Hall, one of England's greatest defence lawyers, took on the hopeless case of Field and Grey. Attempting an alibi. Whilst awaiting the trial to begin, another attempt was made in prison to get any fellow prisoner to give them an alibi. This was a fail. Field and Grey were now lodged in Maidstone jail, where the latter destroyed whatever chance they had had. While at exercise, Grey was alleged to have told a fellow prisoner named Darlington to say that they had been to the circus together on the afternoon of August the 19th. The prisoner immediately reported the alleged conversation to authorities. The trial. The trial took place with much media coverage. Reasons for the sensational aspect of the trial was the brutality of the crime, the salaciousness of the story with the pretty young girl vacationing on her own for the first time, and the murderous outcome upon meeting two local lads. Also, with a famed lawyer, Marshall Hall, leading the defence, it was questioned whether even his celebrated skills could get the two men off in what seemed to be irrefutable evidence. Blow from brick. The trial opened before Mr. Justice Avery at the Sussex Assizes. Marshall Hall appeared with Mr. John Flowers for Grey, and J.D. Cassels defended Field. "Not guilty, sir," chorused the two prisoners. The medical witnesses agreed that death was due to shock following concussion, and that the brick could have caused the injuries on the left side of the face. Witnesses. A barmaid from Albemarle told of the prisoner's visit there on the evening of August the 19th. The two men had beer and asked her to go to the Hippodrome with them, but she declined. She had noticed that they were smoking expensive cigarettes and drinking bottled beer. She had never seen them do that before. The bus conductor insisted that the two men had boarded his bus at 2:45 on August the 19th. He saw a girl greet them at the archway. The conductor positively identified Irene Munro from a photograph of her given to him. The prosecution called more witnesses who swore that they had seen the two men walking with a girl towards Crumbles. Witness after witness identified them as the two men seen to have been talking and laughing with the young woman on the afternoon of August the 19th. Defence. The two men now declared that they had not been to the Crumbles at all, and had not been in Baxter's company on August the 19th. They alleged that they had been to Pevensey together on the afternoon of August the 19th, and had set up the false alibi because the newspaper talk had frightened them. Realizing his case was almost hopeless, Marshall Hall applied himself with great vigour to questions of detail. Marshall Hall's closing arguments lasted almost 2 hours. He pointed out the absence of a motive for the crime. In the judge's summing up, he directed the jury to ask themselves 2 questions. First, does the evidence satisfy us that the murdered girl was in fact that afternoon with the two men going towards the Crumbles? And secondly, were the prisoners out that afternoon with the girl going towards the Crumbles? Found guilty. After an hour, the jury returned to the court. The formal question of verdict having been asked, the foreman answered guilty in a firm voice. The jury, however, recommended both men to mercy on the grounds that the crime was not premeditated, a strange suggestion since they have been proven guilty of murder and possibly the result of Marshall Hall's famed persuasive skills. Both men's faces blanched when they heard the guilty verdict, and Field gripped the dock rail as if to steady himself. There was a dramatic pause, and Mr. Justice Avery addressed the prisoners. There was no emotion in his voice as he said sternly, "Jack Alfred Field and William Thomas Gray, you have been convicted of a foul and brutal murder, and the defence which you have concocted has been demonstrated to be untrue as to the satisfaction of the jury. You must now prepare yourselves to undergo the penalty which the law enacts for such a crime as you have committed." From the Daily Advertiser, the 20th of December, 1920. Eastbourne murder. Field and Gray convicted. Jack Alfred Field, 19, and William Thomas Gray, 20, who were charged with having murdered Irene Munro, a pretty London typist, whose body was found on the August the 20th with the head badly battered on a lonely part of the shingle beach at Eastbourne, have been found guilty. The jury added a recommendation to mercy to its findings. The judge sentenced the men to death. Appeal. The two prisoners appealed to the Criminal Court of Appeals, stating to type with the attempt to shift blame on anyone else. Both men now accused each other of the sole responsibility of the crime. While counsel addressed the court, warders sat between the two former friends in preparation for a scene. Both men were too cowed to attempt hostilities. The Chief Justice declared that Field and Gray's stories were fabricated, put forward in the last desperate attempt to escape the consequences of their crime. The appeals were dismissed. Their appeal was rejected. They were both to hang. Both Field and Gray were executed at Wandsworth Prison on February the 4th, 1921. Neither man confessed to the crime before the execution.
Case 4. The Go-Kart Murder. Death in a Bundle in 1923. The killing of John Johnson and the last woman hanged in Glasgow. It began as a frantic but familiar scene. A boy late home, a worried father scouring the streets, and a mother praying for the best. But by morning, the search for a 13-year-old John Johnson would take a turn so grotesque it defied belief. Wheeled through the streets of Glasgow in a child's go-kart, his small body wrapped in a bed mat and trussed like poultry, the murdered schoolboy would become the centre of one of Scotland's most shocking crimes. And at the heart of it all, a gaunt, poverty-stricken woman named Susan Newell, her silence broken only by her 8-year-old daughter's devastating testimony.
June 1923, and John Johnson, a lad of 13, a good student and popular in school, who sells newspapers after school to make some money, is missing. As the parents wait for his return, the father goes out to scour the streets at 10 at night, hoping to find the boy messing about as young children are wont to do. But everything is shut down and there is no trace of his son. The father contacts the police, who are also out trying to find the boy with no success. The search is temporarily called off to the new day when a most extraordinary event happens. From the Dundee Evening Telegraph, the 22nd of June 1923, schoolboy's mysterious murder. Dead body brought to Glasgow in a go-kart by a woman. The Glasgow and Coatbridge police are prosecuting inquiries into the circumstances surrounding the findings of the body of a 13-year-old boy, which was discovered yesterday afternoon, trussed up in a bed cover in a back court in the Eastern District of Glasgow. The condition of the body suggests strangulation, and there are indications that an attempt was made to dispose of the remains by burning. A woman whose name is given as Susan McAllister or Newell, wife to John Newell, has been detained at the Eastern Police Office in connection with the affair, and the police are now in search of a man who formerly resided in Glasgow but who recently was living with the woman in Coatbridge. The victim of the tragedy was identified as John Johnson, 13, who resides at 23 Whifflet Street in Coatbridge. A tragedy, the inner meaning of which is shrouded in mystery, has been brought to light by the finding in a Glasgow back court of the trussed-up Coatbridge schoolboy, who apparently died a violent death, and the arrest of a woman who, it is alleged, was found in the act of depositing the body. The victim was John Johnson, 13 years of age, son of Robert Johnson, tube worker for 23 Whifflet Street in Coatbridge. The woman detained by the police also resided in that town, and she gave the name of Susan McAllister, and according to the police statement, is 28 years of age and the wife of John Newell, 2 Newland Street in the Whifflet district of the borough. The body was brought by road to Glasgow under circumstances that read stranger than the most sensational fiction. The journey was made partly on foot, with the gruesome burden awkwardly set on a go-kart, and partly on the cart of a hawker who gave a friendly lift, he thought, to road travellers, and who, after setting his passenger and the go-kart down somewhere near Parkhead Cross, went on his way. Body wheeled on a pram. A collective narrative can only be partly surmised, but main facts may be briefly stated. The boy belonged to a respectable family and was favourably regarded by his school companions. He returned from school on Wednesday afternoon at the usual hour, and after tea he left home, as his custom was, to assist in selling papers, and there is no trace of him after 7 o'clock that evening. The search for the boy. When by late hour the boy had not returned home, alarm was felt by his relatives, who went out to search for him, his mother, although an invalid, taking part. The police were also informed, and all through the night the unavailing search was continued. No one has yet come forward to say that they saw anyone leaving the town with a load-on go-kart, but in the early morning a woman accompanied by a little girl and a wheeled vehicle of that description was seen on the road. There was on the cart a bundle, the outer cover of which consisted of a bed mat tied at the four corners. It was evidently heavy, for the attention of the onlookers was drawn to the woman by her efforts to guide the car. Ultimately, it was supposed that the burden was a bundle of washing, and no more notice was taken of the incident. It is surmised that soon afterwards the woman was overtaken by the hawker and that she was given a lift. No doubt the child, a girl of 6 or 7 years of age, would be footsore, and in all probability she may have covered some of the distance on the go-kart with the gruesome load for a seat. The secret of the bundle. It seems extraordinary that the woman and child and the cart could be got onto the lorry without the suspicion of the hawker having been aroused. The secret of the bundle, however, remained when the hawker set down the woman and child along Duke Street near Parkhead Cross. He drove away and the woman trundled the cart along Duke Street. Her movements attracted the attention of a woman who communicated her suspicions of the bundle to a man. It was now some time after 11 o'clock in the forenoon, and a number of people were in the vicinity. Asking his woman informant to inform the police, the man followed the stranger into a back court, and ultimately a constable came on the scene and challenged her. He undid the bed mat and was horrified to find that it contained the body of a boy trussed up like a fowl. There were marks on the neck suggestive of strangulation by hand, and there was the appearance of burning injuries at the back of the neck. The woman was taken into custody and the body was removed to the mortuary at Glasgow Eastern Police Court. Came from Coatbridge. Inquiry suggested to the officials that the arrested woman had come from Coatbridge. The chief constable there, Mr. MacDonald, was communicated with, and immediately the suspicion arose that the disappearance of the schoolboy on the previous evening was connected with the horrible tragedy just laid bare in Glasgow. Mr. Johnson, accompanied by police officers and 1 or 2 relatives, travelled at once to the city, and his worst fears were realised when he identified his son in the victim of the cruel and mysterious crime. Questioned about the bundle. According to eyewitnesses, the woman is stated to have been seen wheeling the go-kart with its gruesome burden along the east end of Duke Street. Several persons are alleged to have interrogated her as to the contents of the bundle. When she reached Fleming Street, she was observed to enter a close. Her actions aroused the suspicion of a woman who informed a constable, and on these two proceeding to the back court, they met the woman coming out of the close, minus the bundle. She was interrogated by the policeman as she attempted to rush past, and was detained while an examination of the package was made. The constable and those with him were horrified when the body of a boy was revealed. Acting upon a statement made by the woman, the police circulated the description of a man wanted in connection with the affair. Scene of the discovery. The courtyard in which the body was found is entered from 4 closes in Duke Street. To the rear, separated by high railings, there is a children's playground. A number of wooden staircases with square brick basements lead from the courtyard to the upper story, and it was behind the basement of one of these staircases that the body of the unfortunate boy was deposited. Witnesses of the woman's arrival state that she stopped outside 650 Duke Street and lifted the bundle from the go-kart. Only then was the true nature of her bundle revealed. A woman noticed that the red-coloured covering contained a human body, and she at once raised an alarm. Robert Foote, an ex-soldier who resided as a lodger at 636 Duke Street and who was returning from an errand to a neighbouring shop, promptly entered the close and was just in time to see the woman scale a 6-foot wall dividing two of the closest. Thought to escape. Realizing that something was amiss, Foote kept a watch on the woman and ran out to the street, re-entering the courtyard at number 630. When the woman saw Foote, she turned back and for a moment seemed to contemplate making an escape, climbing the railings bounding the playground. Foote again ran out to the street and waved to the policeman, who had already been summoned. As the woman attempted to run through the close at number 650, she was stopped by the policeman, who took her into custody. The body of the dead boy lay a few yards away. After her arrest, the woman asked for her girl, and someone in the small crowd that had gathered brought the child forward. The girl, who is believed to be 6 years of age, accompanied her mother to the Eastern Police Office. Police view of the crime. A large crowd gathered in the vicinity of Fleming Street to witness the melancholy spectacle of the removal of the boy victim's body to the mortuary in the Eastern Police Station. Later in the afternoon, the remains were examined by the casualty surgeon. There appears to be no doubt regarding the initial surmise that death was due to strangulation, and a horrible feature of the tragedy is the fact that there are indications that the foul deed had been done by hand. There are a number of ugly marks on the neck, and there is evidence of burning on one of the ears and on the back of the head, which confirms the police's view that they are investigating one of the most dastardly crimes that has occurred in the west of Scotland for many years. The identity of the body is that of the boy Johnson, creating a profound sensation in Coatbridge when the story of its finding in Glasgow became known in the borough in the afternoon. A large crowd gathered near the home of the boy's parents in Whifflet Street, and expressions of horror were heard on all sides. Susan Newell, as she is referred as in most subsequent news articles, is impoverished. Her husband, who is unemployed, has left for his brother's funeral but has not returned. Susan has been caught red-handed. The community is shocked by the horrific nature of John Johnson's wounds and the possibility that an attempt was made to burn him. Investigations ensue, and it is known that her husband has also lived at the same location. So Susan is placed under remand, and a call is made out looking for the missing husband, John Newell. From the Scotsman, the 23rd of June 1923, the murder of a Coatbridge boy, woman before Glasgow, an arrest at Haddington. The woman, Susan McAllister, or Newell, who was arrested in Glasgow on Thursday under dramatic circumstances in connection with the discovery of the body of a 13-year-old boy in a bundle in a back court in Duke Street, was remitted from Glasgow Eastern Police Court to the Sheriff Court at Airdrie yesterday on a charge of having, on June the 20th, in concert with her husband in the house occupied by her at 2 Newlands Street in Coatbridge, assaulted John Johnson, 13, and murdered him. The court proceedings created a great deal of interest, and there was a rush for seats, but only a limited number of people, mostly women, gained entrance. A large crowd congregated outside the building in the hope of getting a glimpse of the accused woman. Tall and thin and poorly dressed, Newell maintained a calm and collected demeanour throughout the whole of the proceedings. Her husband, John Newell, 28, is believed to have been out of work for some time, and he belongs to Summerley, a village in the Coatbridge district. 3 weeks ago, the couple, along with their daughter, went into lodgings at number 2 Newland Street in Coatbridge. The motive for the crime still remains shrouded in mystery. From the appearance of the boy's body, it is believed that death was due to strangulation. Signs of burning give rise to the suspicion that an attempt was made to do away with the body after death. The post-mortem examination was held in the Central Police Office yesterday. Mr. Robert Johnson, tube worker of 23 Whifflet Street in Coatbridge, has identified the body of that of his son, John Johnson. It has been established that the boy was in no way related to Newell or her husband and had returned home from school at the usual hour on Wednesday and after a meal had gone out again. Man surrenders at Haddington. Yesterday, a man who gave his name as Newell surrendered to Detective Sergeant Watson at the Haddington Police Office. He stated that he had seen a copy of The Scotsman in which there was an account of the murder and that he was the husband of the woman who had been arrested. He wished to know if the police had any further information. The police communicated with Coatbridge authorities and the man was detained. It transpires that the man arrived in Haddington on Thursday evening and remained overnight in a common lodging house. He represented that he was anxious to obtain work on a farm. The man will be removed to Glasgow today. The community are appalled at the viciousness of the crime. The police and investigators get to work and manage to accumulate 70 witnesses. It is leaked to the press that Susan Newell will be pleading temporary insanity whilst her husband, John Newell, is said to have a cast iron alibi. The fact that he turned himself in when he saw the crime described in the papers has also helped his case. Janet, Susan's 8-year-old daughter, in the investigation, tells the police that her father was the one who had choked 13-year-old John Johnson and that her mother was just trying to get rid of the body as she panicked. However, as Mr. Newell's alibi is rock solid, and as the evidence accumulated does not correspond with Janet's statement, Janet changes her story. She states that this time she's telling the truth, and that she lied before because that is what her mother told her to do. 8-year-old Janet takes the stand against her mother in sensational evidence. From The Scotsman, the 19th of September 1923, the go-kart tragedy, a plea of insanity, trial in Glasgow High Court. A special sitting of the High Court of Justiciary was held in Glasgow yesterday for the trial of the case which has become known as the go-kart tragedy, in which a husband and wife are indicted for the alleged murder of a Coatbridge boy of 13 years of age. Much interest has been evinced in the case, and long before the time for commencing proceedings, the available space for the public was fully occupied. The accused, John Newell and Susan Newell, were charged with having, on the 20th of June 1923, in a room occupied by them in the house at 2 Newlands Street, Coatbridge, tenanted by Mrs. Young, a widow, assaulted John Johnson, aged 13, son of Robert Johnson, Winflet Street in Coatbridge, beating him on the head with a blunt instrument, seizing hold of him and compressing his throat and throttling him, dislocating the spinal column of his neck and murdering him. Plea of insanity. Mr. Gentles put in a special plea of insanity at the time of the crime on behalf of the female accused. The jury consisted entirely of men. Statement of dead boy's father. Robert Johnson, tube worker of 118 Buchan Street in Coatbridge, father of John Johnson, spoke of his boy's absence on the 20th of June. He asked his girl if she knew where John was, and she thought he might be at the pictures. He got papers from another boy to sell and received commission on his sales. When he didn't return by 10:30 that night, witness became annoyed, and on going to the picture house, he found it shut up, and he had a night hunting for the boy. Next morning, while at his work, Detective Lockhart came to him, and he accompanied Lockhart to the Eastern Police Office and identified the body of his son. He afterwards identified the body a second time prior to the post-mortem examination. He spoke to clothes and boots produced as having been worn by the boy when he disappeared. James McGee Jr. of 257 Dunvan Road, Coatbridge, knew the boy Johnson, who helped him to sell newspapers. On the 20th of June, he gave Johnson 9 papers to sell and left him at 6:20 and never saw him again. From the place he left him to Newlands Street would be about 200 yards. 3 thumps heard. Mrs. Annie Young, a widow residing at 2 Newlands Street, said she occupied a room and a kitchen house, and she lived in the kitchen and let the room. She had the accused as tenants for the room, but did not want them to remain, as they had rows. She got a friend to go to the Newells and tell them they must leave. Mrs. Newell came into the house of witness and asked that she might be allowed to remain till Monday if she paid the rent on Saturday, and the witness agreed to this. The same evening she observed from the kitchen a paper boy go into the Newells' room. It would be about 7:05. She knew the boy, and his name was John Johnson. Just when he got inside, somebody said to him, "Shut the door." It was Mrs. Newell who said it. When the boy had gone in and shut the door, witness heard thumps. She heard the sound 3 times, and the thumps were loud. This was the only noise that she heard. Mrs. Newell came to her door and asked if she could give her a box, but she had none to give. She then noticed that Mrs. Newell came out and locked the room door and went out with a jug. When she returned, she again locked the door. When later she came out to go for a walk with her little girl Janet, she heard her to say something about the police. And this didn't surprise her, as she knew that the girl Janet had been assaulted. The door was again locked. Shortly after 8 o'clock next morning, witness took in the milk, and she knocked at the Newells' door but received no answer. The chief constable came to the house and went into the Newells' room, witness accompanying him. Disappearance of a go-kart. She was asked about a go-kart, and on looking under the bed where the go-kart was kept, they found it was gone. She had never lent the go-kart to Mrs. Newell, and the next time she saw her go-kart was at the police office in Glasgow. A child's evidence. Janet MacLeod, 8, residing in Old Monkland Parish Hospital at present, but formerly living with her stepfather and her mother, the accused, remembered the disappearance of the boy Johnson. She saw her mammy and the boy in the room, she said. Her mammy went out with a jug to Duffy's public house, came back with beer and whiskey and wine. When witness 8-year-old Janet went up to the house, she saw a little wee boy dead on the couch, lying on his face. Mammy, the prisoner, Mrs. Newell, said, "Keep quiet," and then she drank beer. She, her mother, was trying to get up the floor to put the boy in. She took my father's drawers, underpants, and put them over the boy's face, and his nose was bleeding. She got a poker to try to get up the floor to try and get the wee boy in, and she tried to get a box from Mrs. Young. Continuing, she stated that she went with Mammy for a walk, and they went to Glasgow. She did not see her stepfather that day. He went away on the previous day to his brother's funeral, and he never came back. Witness saw 2 policewomen and gave them a story, but it was not the same story that she now gave. She told the other story because her mammy told her to. She did not see anybody do any harm to the boy, and the first that she saw of him was when he was on the sofa. Continuing, witness 8-year-old Janet said, "We got up next morning awfully early and went into Glasgow. We got a lift on a lorry. We put the boy in a pack, in a bed mat, and the pack was on a go-kart, and I got a seat on it. I sat on the bundle of the wee boy." A number of witnesses spoke to seeing the accused woman proceeding to Glasgow, and in Glasgow with the go-kart and the bundle on it, and identified the prisoner as the woman they had seen. Evidence was led as to the arrest of the woman in Duke Street after she had left the bundle in a close there. Constable McGennett, who arrested the woman, said that she told him there had been a row in the house and that her husband had struck her. She wanted the boy to remain in the room because her husband was assaulting her. Her husband was threatening her, and the little boy screamed. It was then that the accused man took the boy by the throat and choked him. Detective Sergeant James Graham said that Mrs. Newell told him that it was her husband who choked the boy on the bed in the house, and that she did not know what to do with the body, and she had to put it on a go-kart and brought it to Glasgow. When taken to the police office, she repeated the same statement. She said, "My husband did it." The statement she made was to a certain extent voluntarily given. As Susan sees her story of her husband having killed the boy completely torn apart, and with the evidence of her own daughter, Susan goes for a temporary insanity plea, which is exceedingly difficult to prove, as her actions all belie a person who has, with planning and effort, made every attempt to cover up her crime. With the insanity plea, Susan gives no motive for the crime. It is thought that she killed John Johnson for the few coppers he had in his pocket from the selling of newspapers. It would be this money, supposedly, that would allow her to rent her room for another week, and which she spent on spirits shortly after killing him. The trial goes into its second day, with the Crown closing its argument on the testimony of the medical evidence recounting in detail the horrific blows 13-year-old Johnson endured. From the Scotsman, the 20th of September 1923, the go-kart murder trial, woman sentenced to death. Crown withdraws charge against husband. The trial was resumed yesterday morning at the continued special sitting of the High Court in the Judiciary Building in Glasgow of John Newell and his wife Susan Newell, who were indicted with murder in connection with what is known popularly as the go-kart tragedy. The charge was that on June the 20th, in a room occupied by John and Susan Newell in the house at 2 Newland Street in Coachbridge, occupied by Mrs. Annie Young, widow, they did assault John Johnson, aged 13 years old, son of Robert Johnson, then residing at Whifflet Street and now at 113 Buchan Street in Coatbridge. They did beat him on the head with a blunt instrument, seize hold of him and compress his throat, and did throttle him and dislocate the spinal column in his neck, and did murder him. A special defence of alibi was put forward in the case of the male accused, while a special plea of insanity at the time of the crime was intimated on behalf of the woman. Following upon the grim revelations on the previous day, and particularly the sensational story told by Mrs. Newell's 8-year-old daughter, it was not surprising that the public interest in the trial was even more widespread than formerly. Despite a cold, damp morning, a queue had formed for the entrance to the public gallery at about 6 o'clock, and an hour later there were over 100 people waiting. The various points mentioned on the previous day evidence by Chief Constable MacDonald of Coatbridge as to John Newell's movements were spoken to by a witness. A warder from Parkhead Model Lodging House spoke as to the accused having stayed in the lodging house, the barman from the Olympia who supplied him with beer on the night of the crime identified him, and a saleswoman in the tobacconist's shop where the accused purchased a pipe and cover also identified him. Medical evidence. Professor John Glaister, Glasgow University, who had carried out the post-mortem examination on the body of the boy, attributed death to 1. Throttling, causing asphyxia by preventing air entering the lungs, coupled with dislocation of the spinal column of the neck, and 2. That the throttling was due to the compression of the windpipe by the hand or hands of the assailant, and that not improbably the extent of that violence produced the dislocation of the neck. 3. That the marks in the deep tissue of the scalp on the right side of the head were produced by the forcible application of a blunt instrument and by means of more than one blow. 4. And that the marks of burning on the left side of the head were due to the head of the deceased having come into contact with fire whilst he was yet living, as indicated by the blisters found. He had been asked to make a report on the mental condition of the woman, and he was of the opinion, after examination, that she was perfectly competent to plead in the charge. Dr. John Anderson, Director of Pathology in Victoria Infirmary, in a report on the woman, said he was of the opinion that she was of sound mind at the time of the occurrence. Dr. Gary, Medical Officer of Her Majesty's Prison, Glasgow, spoke to having kept the woman under observation. He found her intelligent, quiet, and capable of understanding her position and the charge against her and all the details. This closed the case for the Crown. The acquittal of the accused man. Lord Kinross, Advocate Deputy, said that before addressing the jury he did not think he would be doing his duty if he did not say that he thought it better that the charge against the man, John Newell, should be withdrawn. The charge was accordingly withdrawn, and the jury returned a formal verdict of not guilty in reference to him. A mad crime. Lord Kinross, in the course of his address to the jury, said there was a defence put forward that Mrs. Newell was insane at the time, but the only ground of suspecting this was that it was a mad crime. This was not insanity, and he asked for a verdict of guilty. Mr. Gentles made an appeal on behalf of the woman on the ground that at the time of the crime she was not normal. It had been suggested that the boy had a few coppers in his pocket. This could never have affected a normal mind. He reminded them that her husband had deserted her and left her penniless. She had taken his money with him. She had gone to his employers to try and get money, and she had failed. She had no money and no alternative but to be turned out onto the street. There was nothing against the previous life of the woman, and she was deserted and left with her little girls without means. He asked them as practical men, men of experience and knowledge of human life and affairs of her position, calculated to aid in maintaining a normal balance or to throw her into a state of mental desperation. Professor Glaser had admitted that such a condition might produce an abnormal state of mind with maniacal tendency. If you think that she might have been so affected, preceding the defence, then I tell you it is your duty to give her the benefit of the doubt. When he read the account of the crime in the newspapers, he said to himself that the woman could not have been in a normal state of mind. Even after the crime, the attempt to conceal the body beneath the floor with only a few inches between it and the ceiling of the house below, and then her whole conduct the following day in wheeling a body on a go-kart into a big city like Glasgow, with its teeming population, all these were certainly not the acts of a rational woman. He urged the jury to take a merciful view of the fact. The judges summing up. After the lunch interval, the Lord Justice Clerk summed up. The story that had been unfolded to them during the 2 days, he said, was a pathetic and poignant one. A young life had been extinguished. Moreover, it was a strange story. The sequel to the boy's death, however incurred, was such that if a novelist wrote it, probably a hasty public would pronounce it to be quite incredible. But as they knew truth was stranger than fiction, and it was their business to deal with the facts which the evidence in the case revealed. The punishment of murder was death. He said that to remind them, if indeed they required any reminder, of the gravity of the task with which they were confronted. It was for them to say whether Susan Newell had been proved to their satisfaction to be guilty of the murder of John Johnson. The material facts were simple and lay within a narrow compass. Was Mrs. Newell the assailant? He asked. There was no direct evidence that she was. There was no eyewitness to the crime. No human eye saw her hand grasp the boy's throat and press it, but an eyewitness was not essential in such a case. Crimes such as these were not committed in the public eye, and it would be disastrous if, in order to establish a crime, the evidence of an eyewitness was always necessary. Circumstantial evidence was sufficient, and was even more reliable than direct testimony. Circumstances may speak more eloquently and more truly than a human being. It was clear that the boy had entered Newell's room alive, and it was clear, was it not, that he had left it dead. The evidence, if they believed it, was ample to establish that Mrs. Newell was the assailant. Another question was whether Mrs. Newell, at the time of the alleged crime, was insane. They must remember that no family history of insanity in the case has been proved or even suggested. It was more important, moreover, that no insane or unbalanced or even eccentric work was alleged at any time or any place to have been uttered by Mrs. Newell. Many things that she had done after the alleged crime was committed indicated that her mind was far from unbalanced. The evidence was that she was cool, collected, intelligent, and balanced in all that she had said. The jury retired to consider the verdict at 2:23. The jury is out for 35 minutes and find Susan Newell guilty by majority. They stipend a recommendation for mercy. Susan is sentenced to death with a set execution date of the 10th of October. Susan's response is quiet, and she firmly walks back to her cell. Outside, crowds of people attempt to rush the gates to gain entry, but are held back by the multiple police presence. As expected, a petition for a reprieve is put forward. Their main point in the request is a clear lack of motive on Susan Newell's part, so she must have been temporarily insane. The reprieve request is rejected, stating that there are no reasonable grounds to commute the sentence. From the Northampton Chronicle and Echo, the 10th of October 1923, woman hanged, meets death without flinching. Susan Newell, the first woman to be hanged in Glasgow since the 50s, was executed at Duke Street Prison, Glasgow, this morning for the murder of a Coatbridge schoolboy named John Johnson. The executioner was Ellis, and he was assisted by Willis. The trial created a sensation, as the circumstances involved the wheeling of the dead boy's body 11 miles from Coatbridge in a go-kart. The execution was carried out without a hitch. Within 2 minutes of being pinioned, Susan Newell was dead. She offered no resistance and unflinchingly met her doom.
Case 5. The Butcher of the Crumbles. The murder of Emily Kaye in 1924. Charm, lies, and the birth of British forensics. In 1924, a seaside romance turned savage when the dismembered remains of Emily Kaye were discovered in a blood-stained bungalow on Eastbourne's desolate Crumbles. The man responsible, suave, smiling Patrick Mahon, insisted it had all been a terrible accident. But behind the charm was a history of theft, violence, and deception. As the nation following the horror unfolded, it was not just Mahon who would become infamous, it was also the man who brought him down. This was the case that launched Sir Bernard Spilsbury's rise and changed British crime scene investigation forever.
Crumbles Murder 2. The second Crumbles murder in this two-part series, which we are featuring, takes place in 1924 and became famous for its new crime scene methodology in forensic evidence gathering and forensic approach within the UK with the famous pathologist Sir Bernard Spilsbury. This murder was particularly horrific in the brutality inflicted on Emily Kaye. Background. Patrick Mahon seems to have had it all: good looks, easy charm, intelligence. Outwardly, he played the part of a regular church attendee and football enthusiast. He married in 1910 his childhood sweetheart Jessie, and the couple had 2 children. But this facade of respectability began to show signs of strain in 1910. Mahon, the occasional Sunday school teacher and committed family man, was arrested for burglary of a clergyman. In 1911, Mahon stole £123 from his employers and made an escape to the Isle of Man, effectively dumping his wife for another woman with the money he had stolen. He was caught, but Mahon's charm helped to minimize the consequences legally. Jessie took him back, despite the illicit affair he had carried on, and he moved back in with her. 1 year later, he stole £60 from his new employer. This time, the officials were less lenient, and Mahon received a prison sentence of 1 year. Once Mahon had finished his penal servitude, the couple moved to Caen in Wiltshire. Mahon was now continually short of money as he became hooked on gambling. His accumulated debt spiraled. In 1916, Mahon again was caught in the act of burgling a different employer. A servant girl working in the house Mahon was attempting to burgle caught him in the act. Mahon attacked her, hitting her repeatedly with a hammer and asking her where the keys to the safe were as she lost consciousness. The girl recovered enough to be able to identify Mahon. This time, Mahon was sentenced to 5 years imprisonment. In 1919, Mahon was again released from prison and returned to his long-suffering wife, Jessie. By this time, she was working as a secretary to the firm Consols Automatic Eratos in Richmond. She managed to secure a position for her husband as a salesman. Investigations into his antecedents would show that Mahon continued to carry on numerous affairs with various women throughout his job as a salesman. It was easy to do with the travelling that his job required. He often used a pseudonym to hide his true identity. In one of his frequented visits to the London office, he met Emily Kaye. Emily Kaye was a private secretary and shorthand typist working in London, the same office that Patrick Mahon regularly visited in his role as sales manager. Emily, an enthusiastic tennis player at 37, dreamed of married life and family. Flattered by the attention she received from charming, handsome Patrick, known as Derek Patterson to her, Emily eagerly joined in an affair. Derek, as she knew Mahon by, had stated he was unmarried. The relationship must have seemed an opportunity to fulfill her dreams of husband and family, despite what would have been considering her advanced years. Emily, within her working life, had some £500 in savings, worth approximately £40,000 in 2023. Always short of money, no doubt the news of her nest egg enticed Mahon to pursue Emily hard, with an aim of extracting her money from her. Emily, with visions of a family and a happily ever after, could not believe her good fortune. Mahon, always with his eye on her fortune, had been promising Emily marriage under the assumed name of Derek Patterson. On holiday in Bournemouth, Mahon presented Emily with a diamond and sapphire ring, proving to Emily that he was sincere and that they would marry and be a family. Mahon had convinced Emily that they should now emigrate to South Africa for their new life together. To add to her dream, Emily, absolutely delighted, discovered she was pregnant. Emily, bubbling over with the news of all her dreams coming true, shared the happy events in letters to her family and friends. The bungalow. In preparation of their move to South Africa, Mahone rented a cottage in the Crumbles in Eastbourne, which would be their love experiment. The cottage was rented under Mahone's new pseudonym, Waller. Gleefully, Emily withdrew the majority of her savings. Emily arrived in Eastbourne on the 8th, staying temporarily at a hotel. She then moved to the rented bungalow on April the 12th. Making preparation for the anticipated migration to South Africa, Derek, as Emily knew Mahone, would meet her there in a few days. Friends received letters glowing with supposed details of the forthcoming trip, including a short stay in Paris on the way there. Mahone, to arrive later, was supposedly working in getting Emily her passport and trying to tie up loose ends. He was to arrive at Eastbourne railway station on the 12th or 13th of April to be collected by Emily. Before Mahone embarked on the train to take him to their love nest, Mahone had purchased a chef's knife and hacksaw from an ironmonger next to London Victoria Station. The crime. The crime was a bloodbath. On the 15th, Emily had written to her friends expounding on the upcoming move to South Africa. According to Mahone, it was on this day that the death of Emily occurred. In Patrick's version of events, the two had a small spat. Emily allegedly attacked Patrick by throwing an axe at him, which grazed his ear. In his defence, Patrick stated the two grappled each other and Emily fell down, hitting her head on the coal scuttle. Not knowing what to do, Patrick covered her body with her fur coat. The next day, Mahone invited a woman he had met to stay with him at the cottage. The woman, Ethel Duncan, spent the weekend with him, where they dined expensively and visited the London Palladium. Upon her departure, Mahone severed Emily's head and legs and placed the pieces in a travelling trunk. Over the coming week, the process of dismembering Emily continued. He burnt Emily's feet and legs in the fireplace, as well as her skull, which he then crushed, swept up, and discarded. Emily's skull was never recovered, other than some fragments of her jawbone. Mahone continued to sever Emily's arms and the torso into pieces. Some parts of her body were boiled. Other parts were gathered together and thrown out of a railway carriage. The discovery. Jessie, Mahone's long-enduring wife, suspected her husband was continuing to cheat on her. To prove her assumption, she hired a private detective, John Beard, to investigate Patrick, and it would be the beginning of his downfall. Whilst doing her own investigations of her husband, Jessie found a luggage ticket for Waterloo Station. With her hired detective by her side, the pair went to look at the bag that had been left there. Upon opening it, they discovered a knife and bloody clothing. With advice from her investigator, the ticket was quietly returned to Mahone's suit pocket, and Scotland Yard were contacted. The arrest. On the 2nd of May, at Waterloo Station, Mahone was arrested while looking to retrieve the bag he had left there. Scotland Yard were waiting for him. At Scotland Yard, the bag was further analysed. Both the knife and the clothing were heavily stained with blood. There was also a tennis racket with Emily's initials on it. Mahon was questioned hard by investigators. His initial responses were vague as he tried to explain away what was clearly linked to a crime. Eventually, Mahon confessed that he had been involved with the death of Emily, but that it was not murder, and gave the address of where the death had occurred. From the Sunday Mirror, the 4th of May, 1924, Bungalow of Death. Neighbours on Crumbles tell of bobbed-haired woman. The detention at Waterloo had its sequel yesterday in sensational investigations carried out by the East Sussex Police at Langley Cottage near Pevensey, on the edge of Eastbourne's desolate Crumbles. Near the scene of the murder, 17-year-old Irene Munro in August 1920. The police forced an entry into a building known as the Officers' Bungalow, the largest of 8 bungalows which form an L at Langley Point. There, it is stated, they found the dismembered body of a young woman who had been dead nearly a fortnight. A neighbour last night told the Sunday Pictorial the story, so far as it is known, of the latest occupants of the Officers' Bungalow. She said the house was rented about 6 weeks ago by a youngish man and a pretty bob-haired woman from the owner, Mrs. Hutchinson, who is now believed to be in South Africa. Police came in droves to work the horrific crime scene. When Spilsbury arrived at the cottage, he was appalled by the lack of forensic care being taken with the scene of the crime. Detectives were sifting through evidence with their hands, and there was no systematic approach to the murder scene. It was this case which Spilsbury played a large part that changed the way detectives approached crime scene documentation and evidence collection. It was from this case that Spilsbury's murder bag, including tweezers, separate bags to place evidence in, plastic gloves, and measuring tape, became standard kit given to detectives in future cases. Mahon himself insisted that the death of Emily had been completely accidental and in large part due to self-defence. From the Birmingham Daily Post, the 7th of May, 1924, Crumbles Bungalow Mystery. Remanded man's reply to murder charge. It was not murder. Another stage in connection with the discovery last week of the portions of a woman's body in a bungalow at the Crumbles near Eastbourne was reached yesterday. Patrick Mahon was charged at Hailsham Police Court with the wilful murder of Emily Kaye, 29, at Langley on or about April the 15th. Mahon was detained last Friday calling for a portmanteau at Waterloo Station, London, and was conveyed to Hailsham on Monday. Yesterday morning, Superintendent Sinclair of the Sussex County Police had Mahon brought out of the cells of the Hailsham Police Station and formally charged with murder. The dark-haired woman who has been mentioned in connection with the mystery attended the police station at Hailsham at the initiation of the police and made a statement. It is understood she will attend the inquest today when developments are expected. The police, it is stated, are endeavouring to trace a third woman who is believed to have stayed at the bungalow recently. The woman mentioned were alleged visitors to the Crumbles cottage, invited by Mahon whilst Emily's dead body lay under a fur coat. It was never clearly established if they also stayed at the cottage whilst parts of Emily's body had been dismembered. As could be expected, the case of the attractive man, his illicit pregnant girlfriend who was now found dismembered, and the possibility that he had entertained 2 other women within the bungalow whilst Emily lay dead under her fur coat, led to a media frenzy. From the Birmingham Daily Post, the 7th of May, 1924, Crumbles Bungalow Mystery. Crowds in court. Mahon was brought before the magistrates yesterday afternoon. A large crowd had gathered outside, and directly the doors were opened, there was an unseemly rush on the part of the people who attempt to push their way in. At first, the police at the doors were swept aside, but other officers came in to their assistance, and they were successful in keeping the crowd back. Coats were torn and hats smashed in the melee. Within a few moments, over 200 persons had managed to squeeze into the space normally accommodating between 40 and 50. Among those present were Superintendent Wensley, Chief Inspector Savage, and Inspector Hall of Scotland Yard. Mahon's rather thin face twitched as he glanced around the court on entering the dock. He is a tall, good-looking man with brown curly hair, turning grey, and blue eyes. His face was unshaven, and hair ruffled. He wore a green striped fawn coat. Superintendent Sinclair stated that the prisoner was received into custody on Monday at Hailsham from Inspector Savage of Scotland Yard. A popular man. Mahon, it is learned, has for the past months lived with his wife and 9-year-old son in Pagoda Avenue, Richmond, in Surrey. Mrs. Mahon is still living in Pagoda Avenue. Their daughter, aged 12, is attending Kew School for Girls. Mahon is a prominent figure in Richmond bowling circles and is a member of the Mid-Surrey Bowling Club. He played with other members only last Thursday and seemed then in his usual spirits. A member of the club said on Monday night, "He is an exceedingly charming and popular man." Police searches. As already stated, the human remains found in the bungalow were so mutilated, portions had been incinerated, that the task of identification was rendered extremely difficult. The police yesterday resumed digging operations in the bungalow grounds in the hope of finding the missing head. Every attempt was made to be able to confirm that the dismembered woman was indeed Emily Kaye, but the finding of the skull continued to elude the police. From the Dundee Evening Telegraph on the 5th of May, 1924, Vanished Girl and the Bungalow Mystery. Digging operations and other investigations are being feverishly conducted by the police with a view to throwing further light on the mystery of the dismembered body of a woman found in the officer's house, a bungalow at Pevensey Bay on the Crumbles near Eastbourne. No charge has yet been made against the man who was so dramatically detained at a cloakroom at Waterloo Station when he called for a portmanteau deposited earlier in the week. The portmanteau was found to contain blood-stained clothing. The man gives the name of Patrick Mahon and has stated that his wife lives in West London. Inquiries are being made for a Miss Kaye, a tall, bobbed-haired girl who lived at a club in Guildford Street in London for a year and left a month ago, telling her clubmates that she was engaged to be married and was going abroad. Her description coincides with that of the girl seen at the bungalow. Further discoveries by the police. 4 plainclothes officers who have been making inquiries in London in connection with the case returned to Scotland Yard this afternoon in a taxicab, each of them carrying a strapped and bulging suitcase, one of which bore the letters HHK. The task which confronts the police in what is one of the most astounding of crimes of recent years is a formidable one. Whoever perpetrated the ghastly murder has sought to destroy all traces of the victim's identity, and at the moment the head of the dismembered trunk cannot be found. It is to be feared that when the head is discovered, it will be so mutilated that it will not afford any great clue to the victim's identity. But there is a strong resemblance to the description of the girl seen at the bungalow and the missing Miss Kaye. Human remains. The story of the discovery of the human remains is related by Dr. R.M. Leclerc of Pevensey. I was called there on Saturday about 10 a.m. by the Hailsham police, he said, and in company with Chief Inspector Savage and Inspector Hall of Scotland Yard, entered the back room of the bungalow, in which was a large trunk containing several parcels. The cover of the first parcel was a woman's coat frock. It was wrapped round a mass of flesh and bone, including a hip bone which had been sawn in 2. In another parcel were wrapped other bones from which most of the flesh had been hacked away. 2 other parcels contained further bones, and in a 4-pound biscuit tin were the heart and other organs, all cut away. Lower down in the trunk we found a woman's fawn coat wrap, a nightdress, a pot of face cream, and 2 pairs of suede shoes with a quantity of lingerie. I should think death occurred not more than 12 days ago. The woman was, I should think, of average height or a little above. She must have been a broad-chested woman, for the collarbone we found was exceptionally large. Flesh boiled. 2 stewpans in the kitchen contained parts of the body which had been boiled, and in the grate were a number of charred bones. We noticed a 3-legged coal scuttle, 2 of the legs which were bent and smeared with blood. It is quite possible the skull had been burned. The dismemberment must have occupied a man for at least 2 days. Sir Bernard Spilsbury spent hours in examining of the remains, and later had a long consultation with Chief Superintendent Wensley, Scotland Yard. Dr. Spilsbury accompanied the police officers in charge of the case today, who again visited the bungalow to continue his investigations. Digging operations were resumed in the garden, the back of the building, which is surrounded by an 8-foot wall. The detained man. The man detained, whose name is given as Patrick Mahon, has not yet been charged. He was taken from Cannon Row Police Office in Scotland Yard, where he was interrogated. Patrick Mahon is about 5'9" to 10 inches in height, biggish in appearance, clean-shaven, and was wearing a smart bowler hat and plum-coloured overcoat. Police and medical evidence at present all tend to confirm that the body of only one woman is involved in the affair. Dr. Spilsbury had a most difficult task in assembling the remains situated about the bungalow. For this purpose, a number of tins were requisitioned from the occupants of the neighbouring bungalows. One experienced officer engaged in the investigation stated it was one of the most horrible cases he had ever come in contact with. The head of the victim had completely disappeared, and in spite of the exhaustive search, no traces of it can be found. The occupants, who had taken the bungalow next door to the officer's house for a long period, have been so startled at this crime that they have made arrangements to leave today. Missing girl's engagement. When the Miss Kaye who resembles the woman at Pevensey left the Green Cross Club hostel, she told the secretary and housekeeper that she was going to Cape Town to be married. It was about the end of March, I think, the first Saturday of the tennis season, said a clubmate of Miss Kaye, that I first heard of her approaching marriage. She came bounding into my room, threw her racket on the bed and exclaimed, "It's fixed, my dear." I asked what she was referring to and looked radiantly happy. She pointed to an engagement ring and replied, "The date." I pleaded with her to confide the date to me, but putting her finger to her lips, she said with a laugh, "Ah, wait and see. I'm leaving here next week." Prolific letter writer. Other members of the club who reside on the premises stated that Miss Kaye never talked about her affairs or her work. Games, particularly tennis, was the only subject about which she ever spoke in the common room. She seldom was out after 9 o'clock at night, spending most of the evenings reading novels. She was an extraordinarily prolific letter writer, said one of her chums, and we teased her that most of her salary must have been spent on postage stamps. Miss Kaye lived at the club for 11 months, but during that time never divulged the name of or any other information concerning her fiancé, who never called on her at the hostel. While the police are satisfied that only one girl had been murdered, it would appear that two different girls have been seen. Clubmate's story of engagement ring and intended marriage. The view is held by the experts that the mutilations were carried out within 2 days of death, and that the woman died about 10 days ago. Scotland Yard is endeavouring to discover whether there is any connection between Eastbourne and Wimbledon Common discoveries. It may be recalled that on Wimbledon Common on Good Friday, a portion of a woman's leg was discovered. It may turn out that these two mysteries relate to only one crime. The discovery of the crime followed the detention of a man at Waterloo Station in London, called for a long carpet bag which had been left in a cloakroom, and which the attention of the police had been drawn owing to the offensive smell which came from it. Investigations of the bag was found to contain a quantity of women's underclothing and a butcher's knife. With time, it would transpire that Mahon had attempted to dump various body parts wherever he could, including one package of body parts that were thrown from a train window on his way back home. The trial. The trial was heavily based on the forensic evidence produced by Spilsbury. Although there was no question that Mahon had been involved in the death of Emily, the crux of the trial was whether her death had been accidental or premeditated and purposeful. Mahon, trusting in his charm and good looks, insisted that it had all been an accident. Actually, the dismemberment, which had taken place over a week, had been a panicked response to the death of Emily, he claimed. in one of his claims, he stated that she had attacked him and he had defended himself. In that process, he alleged that Emily had fallen and hit her head on the coal scuttle, a cheap, easily bendable coal scuttle. Spilsbury proved that there was no damage whatsoever to the coal scuttle which would have occurred if Emily's head had struck it. He went on to prove forensically that Mahon's purchased meat saw and knife were a match to the cuts on Emily's pregnant body. It was a triumph for the emergence of forensics in criminal prosecutions within the UK. From Reynolds' paper, the 13th of July, 1924, Mahon was arrested on the 2nd of May at Waterloo, where he was taking a bag from a cloakroom. In the bag were found a number of blood-stained articles and Cook's knife. When arrested, Mahon said the judge made a long statement as to how he became acquainted with the woman. Mahon stated, "We quarrelled over certain things, and in a violent temper she threw an axe at me. It hit me a glancing blow. During our struggle we overturned a chair and her head fell on an iron coal scuttle, and it appeared to stun her. This happened at about 12 midnight. I attempted to revive her, but found she was dead." Mahon testified on his own behalf for over 5 hours, insisting on his version of events. Points which worked against his version of events included the pre-purchase of the knife and the hacksaw, and his rental of the accommodation under an assumed name. Mahon had also attempted to convince the court that the affair with Emily had not been his idea. It was Emily who had insisted that they embark upon an affair together. Mahon had made changes from his original statement to later statements and statements in court regarding the date of Emily's death. These discrepancies in his testimony were highlighted in court, despite Mahon's charm offensive. From Spilsbury's evidence, it was proven that deceased Emily Kaye had died a day earlier than had appeared in Mahon's first statement. The jury were not taken in by Mahon's charm and found him guilty in under an hour. Appeal. The expected appeal was filed under the pretense of misdirection by trial judge Avery. The appeal was summarily rejected. Mahon was convicted and executed at Wandsworth Prison on the 3rd of September 1924, protesting his innocence until the last. From the Illustrated Police News, 11th of September 1924, the execution of Mahon. Patrick Herbert Mahon, the handsome man of commerce, who killed and dismembered Emily Beelby Kaye, the typist, in their seaside bungalow at the Crumbles at Eastbourne, has been executed. Mahon walked to the scaffold with firm tread and uplifted head and met his death stoically. He did not utter a single word from the time of leaving his cell until the end. His executioners were Pierpont and Willis, and the whole proceedings lasted less than 1 minute. There was pallor in his face, produced doubtlessly by his long incarceration, but he betrayed none of the expressions seen when he resented certain evidence given against him at his trial. As he neared the scaffold, he threw back his head in an effort of complete self-control. It was one of the swiftest executions in the history of the prison. At 9:20, the notice intimating that the sentence of death had been carried out, was posted on the blackboard affixed the gates at Wandsworth Prison. Outside were over 1,000 people, including a considerable proportion of women and girls. The knife and saw bought and used by Mahon to dismember the body of his victim are to be placed in the Black Museum of Scotland Yard, where a number of relics used by other prisoners are kept.
Case 6. The Blackmail, the Bungalow and Madam X, the Untold Murder Mystery of 1929. It began with a scandal, a married man, £20,000 embezzled, and a shadowy figure known only as Madam X. But when Madam X was discovered battered outside her seaside bungalow, the truth turned stranger than fiction. Who was Kate Jackson? A novelist, a noblewoman, a fraud, and who struck the fatal blow? In this episode, we unravel one of the most bizarre and twisting cases of the 1920s, a tale of blackmail, multiple identities, vanished fortunes, and a murder that remains officially unsolved to this day.
George Harrison, Embezzlement Case, 1927. To start this story, we must jump backwards to 1927 and the famous case of embezzlement brought against Mr. George Harrison. Mr. Harrison was eventually convicted of embezzling £20,000. His defence was that he had been blackmailed by a mysterious Madam X, who required weekly payments from him, thereby leading him to embezzle funds from the company in which he worked. The blackmail began in 1914, when Mr. Harrison had had a minor car accident with Kate Jackson. Going under the name of Molly Legrease, she fainted and was looked after by Mr. Harrison. This incident developed into an affair between the two. Mr. Harrison was married. Kate, known as Molly, began requesting payments to keep the secret. The payment developed into his embezzling in order to meet the financial demands. 2 years later, the mysterious Madam X was unveiled to be the badly beaten Kate Jackson, found in a crumbled heap outside her bungalow. From the Western Mail, the 6th of February 1929. Mysterious attack. Unconscious woman and departing car scream in the dark. Limeslade Bungalow Colony at the Mumbles, Swansea, was the scene of a sensational affair late on Monday night. A married woman named Kate Jackson, aged about 50, who has for some years lived at Kenilworth, a Limeslade bungalow, was found in an unconscious condition outside the bungalow, apparently having been the victim of an attack by someone who is believed to have driven away in a motor car. Mrs. Jackson was conveyed to the Swansea Hospital, where she lies in an unconscious state, with police officers waiting at the institution in the hope that she will recover and be able to throw some light on the affair. In the meantime, the police, who were first informed of the affair by the hospital authorities, are pursuing another line of inquiry. As investigations are pursued regarding her antecedents and history, the connection of Kate Jackson being the hidden Madam X in the embezzlement trial is revealed by the press. Could this be the reason Kate had been murdered? From the Western Mail, the 6th of February 1929. Limeslade mystery. Madam X regains consciousness. Husband's story. Doctor who saw car near bungalow. There were no developments on Wednesday in connection with the mysterious attack on Mrs. Kate Jackson, which took place just outside her bungalow, Kenilworth, in Limeslade, Mumbles, on Tuesday night. Mrs. Jackson, who figured as Madam X and later gave evidence in a sensational London embezzlement case, which resulted in a trade union official being sent to penal servitude for 2 years, lies in a Swansea hospital in a serious condition, suffering from head injuries. Detectives and police officers have maintained a constant vigil at her bedside in readiness to take a statement. The woman was found unconscious near the back door of her bungalow, with her head in a pool of blood and a broken flagon nearby. Husband's story of discovery. On the night of the affair, I was reading in bed half asleep when I heard a scream and then a dog bark. I went to the door and found my wife on the ground, but raised up as if she was trying to open the door. She had apparently crawled about 7 feet. She was bleeding from the head, and Dr. Taylor was called, and she was taken to the hospital. Dr. Taylor told me when he called that he met a motor car dashing away without lights when he was on his way up. As police maintain a constant vigil at Kate's bedside in hopes that she will be able to tell them what had happened, they begin to look into her history. What comes up is an exotic and almost unbelievable story regarding her parentage. Kate Jackson, alias Kate Atkinson, alias Molly Legris. There were many stories circulating about Kate Jackson, most notably her supposed exotic upbringing and her supposed international connections. From the Western Mail, the 8th of February 1929. Madam X afraid. Neighbour's story of a secret menace. Her early life and parentage mystery. In this statement, Mr. Jackson said that his wife told him she was born in India and called herself Molly Legris, saying that that was her pet name. When they were married, she gave the name of Kate Atkinson, of the believed in Lancaster. He also said to have expressed the belief that their adopted child is of titled parentage. His wife had always been something of a mystery to him. She had told him that once she was bought the identity of a girl who went to Australia, and she had also said that she was the youngest daughter of a duke. Letters with a crest. It is a fact that she several times received letters in envelopes bearing a crest, and she sometimes received anonymous letters, but she never told me the contents of them, although they appeared to worry her. As time went on, I became convinced that my wife married me because she wanted me to protect her from someone. She never told me her real secrets, and I don't know today who she really is. I know she is very accomplished and can speak several languages. Neighbour and intense fears. Mrs. Dimmock, the neighbour whom Mrs. Jackson was with on the Monday evening in an interview, said that Mrs. Jackson had been in fear of a secret menace for 5 years. She would not divulge the cause of her alarm, but latterly this fear had become intensified. On Friday, a saloon car was standing on the road not far from Kenilworth. It was at night, and all the lights were out. On the following day, Mrs. Jackson told her that she had been so alarmed the previous night that she had locked herself in. Mr. Jackson is understood to have made numerous statements to the Swansea police, and reference to Farnborough and other places where his wife is believed to have stayed before settling at the Mumbles have caused them to make extensive inquiries in the districts mentioned. These inquiries, however, have failed so far to cast any light on the affair. Up to a late hour last night it was understood that Mrs. Jackson although having periods of consciousness, had not recovered sufficiently to make a coherent statement to the police. With a case now potentially looking to be of international and possibly aristocratic leanings, Scotland Yard are called in to help. From the Western Mail, the 11th of February 1929. Madam X dead. Limeslade bungalow mystery deepens. No statement to the police. Scotland Yard officers may be called in. Mrs. Kate Jackson, who was the victim of a mysterious attack outside her bungalow home, Kenilworth, Limeslade near Swansea, died in Swansea Hospital at midday on Sunday without making a statement. And so the mystery deepens. It was late on Monday night, February the 4th, that Mrs. Jackson, who, as Madam X, figured in a sensational embezzlement prosecution in London 2 years ago, was admitted to the hospital suffering from grave head injuries. During the past week, references to a mysterious motor car, anonymous letters and a secret menace have been made, and the police have made extensive inquiries. The post-mortem reveals 9 wounds to her head, but the actual cause of death was a heart attack brought on by the assault. Investigations from Scotland Yard reveal that Kate Jackson regularly received large amounts of money in the post. She was also known to have large amounts of cash and jewels on hand. Where did the money come from? Who was Kate Jackson, and who was the antagonist Kate was so fearful of? The neighbour, Mrs. Dimmock, with whom Kate had gone to the cinema on that fateful day, reported all she knew to police and papers. From the Western Mail, the 12th of February 1929, Limeslade mystery. Madame Legris, novelist, former Swansea woman's strange stories of Mrs. Jackson. The Chief Constable of Swansea stated on Monday that the police had definitely established the identity of Mrs. Jackson. She was, he said, the daughter of a labourer and was born in Ray in Lancashire, her maiden name being Kate Atkinson. She had relatives in Lancaster, Bradford and Liverpool, but they had not heard from her for years and apparently thought she had been killed during an air raid in London during the war. Married in Cardiff. Mrs. Jackson, who is said to have had an adventurous career, was married in Cardiff after the war. It is understood that for a little more than 2 years, from 1922 to 1924, Mrs. Jackson lived at Warwick Farm, Ash Vale in Surrey. Before going to Warwick Farm, she lived alone at Southampton Street, South Farnborough in Hampshire. She bought Warwick Farm, which she afterwards sold to a Mr. Morgans of Swansea. While at Ash Vale, she adopted a baby girl, of whom she was very fond. The girl, Betty, is now 6 and is being looked after by a neighbour at the Mumbles. Romantic story. To a very special correspondent of the London Evening News who visited Warwick Farm, Ash Vale on Monday, Mrs. Morgans told a strange and romantic tale which gives added colour to some of the more remarkable statements concerning Mrs. Jackson's career which have been made in Swansea during the past few days. Mr. Jackson, said Mrs. Morgans, was the son of my dearest friends. I had received a letter from Mr. Jackson telling me that Mrs. Jackson was coming over for a little holiday. He broke the news that his wife was bringing a baby girl with her. She arrived at Swansea, and I was the godmother at the christening of the little girl who we called Betty. At that time, Mrs. Jackson said the child was her own. She stayed in Swansea with us for nearly 6 weeks, and during that time the most curious things were happening in our house. Letters came to her in at least 4 different names, 2 of which I remember were Madame Legris and Mrs. Amber. A novelist. Naturally, I spoke to her about it, and she said, "You did not know I was a novelist and that I am making large sums of money from the magazines for articles I am sending to them." She added that she used various names when writing her novels, and that the money she was receiving was various royalties and publishing fees. By every post came registered letters, some of them containing money orders and others packed with treasury notes. One day she called me upstairs and said, "Look at this. Is it not wonderful?" She was sitting up in bed and was surrounded by treasury notes. There must have been hundreds of them piling up in front of her. She picked them up and threw heaps into the air. They all dropped all around her head and fell on the pillow. Then she said to me, "That is what comes of being clever. I was a journalist at one time and was about the only woman to see the siege of Sydney Street." After that, she gave me the story of her life. A strange story, but one which I have learned is true in many details, although probably in parts she has been romanticizing. Mrs. Jackson's life story. Mrs. Jackson explained to me that she was born in India, the daughter of a famous Scottish family, and that they had left the country when she was 6 years old on account of a stabbing affray. She showed me a terrible scar on her leg, which she said was caused by an Indian servant who attacked her with a knife and wounded her seriously. After this, her people decided it would be unwise to stay in India, and according to the story, they brought her back to London and lived in a house near Portman Square. She was there until she became of age, but fell in love with the butler, and after several other episodes, according to her story, she ran away. She told us she had been a governess and that she had travelled to France. She spoke French fluently. I have never met a more fascinating woman, and there was no doubt she had received a splendid education. She was very vivacious and used to say to me, "Money? What is money? I have thousands for theatres and champagne." Registered letters were numerous in Swansea, and she was always changing money orders at the post office. Then, at the end of her holiday, she went to Ash Vale, but soon afterwards she wrote to us asking if we could take over the farm for her. We were anxious to help, and so eventually did so. Always writing. She was always writing, and although we did not know that these were letters, she told us at the time they were short stories and novels. Money came to the farm at Ash Vale, and we thought, of course, it was payments for these. When she was ill in bed, she asked me into her rooms and then produced a handsome case carved in Indian fashion and asked me to look inside. To my surprise, this case was packed with jewels, scores of costly items of jewellery, including earrings and necklaces. Mrs. Jackson took out a bracelet studded with diamonds and pearls. "You can have that," she said. "It's only one of scores I have." When I refused, she said, "Well, take it and keep it until Betty grows up, but I would have nothing to do with it." She took the jewel box away, and I do not know what happened to the contents, but probably they were sold. She always spends money as fast as it came in, and from Ash Vale would travel up to London frequently. Her identity as daughter of a farmer in Lancaster is hotly disputed by her husband and friends, as being not possible. They state she had bought that identity from a girl who had moved to Australia. No reason is given as to why she needed to buy a new identity. Theories swarm as to the possible motivations for wanting to attack Kate Jackson. They included revenge for her testimony against George Harrison several years before, possible ties to royalty, possibly the attack was aimed indirectly at her adopted daughter, Betty, possibly it was her supposed old partner, Leopold de Gris, said to have been either a butler or a portrait painter. The possibility of Kate being a serial blackmailer with multiple identities began to emerge. Could her murderer be one victim who had had enough? And what of her husband? The scream emitted by Kate when she was attacked was heard by the neighbour. Her husband inside, who, when called, was found to be only in his underpants, was deemed to have been slow to react. Why was he so slow in contacting medical help? And why had he not reported the incident to the police? It was the hospital who had contacted the police to report the attack. Pushing aside the many intricate variables of differing identities, international connections, and dubious stories regarding her career and antecedents, Scotland Yard zero in on her husband, Thomas Henry Jackson, as the culprit of the murder. From the Western Mail, the 25th of February 1929. Jackson arrested. Dramatic developments at Limeslade. Murder charge preferred. Detectives' Sunday evening visit to bungalow. Thomas Henry Jackson, a fishmonger of Kenilworth, Limeslade in Swansea, was arrested on Sunday evening on a charge of murdering his wife, Mrs. Kate Jackson, otherwise known as Madam X, who died in Swansea Hospital a fortnight ago as the result of severe head injuries. The arrest was effected by Chief Inspector Collins of Scotland Yard in dramatic circumstances. Jackson was removed to Swansea Police Station and detained there pending his appearance before the magistrates this Monday morning. Sequel to police activity. When Chief Inspector Collins arrested Jackson, he was accompanied by the Chief Constable of Swansea, Mr. T. Rawson, Detective Sergeant Ato of Scotland Yard, and Detective Inspector Gubb of the Roses Police Force. The party travelled in the Chief Constable's car, and inasmuch the police officers have paid frequent visits to the bungalow during the past few weeks, it did not appear at first as if special significance attached to their appearance at Limeslade, which had been made concerning her adventurous career. After a cinema visit, Kate Jackson was found unconscious at the rear of her bungalow following her return from a visit to Swansea Cinema with the wife of a neighbour. Near to her was the broken glass of a flagon. For a week she lay unconscious or semi-conscious in Swansea Hospital, with police officers constantly in attendance at her bedside in the hope of securing information with regard to the assault of which she was apparently the victim. She died without making a statement, and, following her death, the services of Scotland Yard officers were requisitioned to assist in elucidating the mystery. Mysterious Madam X. Consequently, the news of the arrest of Jackson created a sensation throughout the district. Jackson, it is understood, made a statement in reply to the charge. Since the death of his wife, the accused had continued to reside at the bungalow with Mrs. Jackson's adopted daughter, Betty, and to carry on his trade as a fishmonger in the Swansea and Mumbles area. Whilst Mrs. Jackson lay in hospital, it was revealed that she was the Madam X who figured as a witness in a Jeans Lionel embezzlement case in which a trade union official was involved 2 years ago. It was also discovered that she had lived in various districts under different names and had been regarded as a woman of substantial means. In one village, she was believed to be a journalist and fiction writer, and in another, an artist gone fashion designer. Statements crediting her with distinguished parentage were also circulated, but the police inquiries revealed the fact that she was the daughter of a Lancashire farm labourer. A secret funeral. The only mourners at her funeral were her husband, his father, and 2 personal friends. Great secrecy had been maintained in regard to the arrangements. Even the clergyman conducted the service, being ignorant of the identity of the deceased woman until shortly before the service. Jackson showed considerable emotion after the coffin had been lowered into the grave. What exactly was the case against Jackson by the police? Scotland Yard attempted to reconstruct the crime. From the Western Mail, the 13th of March, 1929, the fate of Madam X. Police reconstruction of the crime. Attack in the bungalow. Crown allegations in case against husband. Opening the case against Thomas Henry Jackson, husband of the murdered woman, at Swansea Police Court on Tuesday, the prosecuting solicitor, Mr. Robert Paling, submitted the following reconstruction of the Limeslade bungalow mystery. That Mrs. Jackson, Madam X, was battered about the head with a broken flagon bottle or a motor tyre lever after she had removed her coat. That she screamed and her coat was thrown over her head to deaden her calls, and more blows struck. That those blows were struck inside the bungalow and she staggered out to collapse in the backyard. That the man who struck the blows was her husband. Jackson, Mr. Paling said, accompanied his wife to the hospital and there told the doctor that he would inform the police, but he returned home without having done so. There are nearly 40 witnesses for the prosecution. Jackson testified in court regarding his wife. From the Western Mail, the 13th of March, 1929. Wife as Madame Legris. The statement made to the police that morning said Mr. Paling dealt with the history of Jackson's wife previous to the assault upon her. Jackson said he first met his wife at Lyons Corner House in Piccadilly, and that would be about 1919. She told him her name was Madame Legris and that she wrote in that name. Later they lived together as man and wife. She had plenty of money and he did not work. He had had an army gratuity of £180. Later he said that the woman suggested that they should get married, and they were married at Cardiff Registry Office in January 1922. They lived on a farm in Surrey, but it was unprofitable, and his wife exchanged it for a house in Ronda Street, Swansea, where they lived until she bought a bungalow named The Laurels at Limeslade. They resided there about 3 years. When a man named Harrison had been tried at the Old Bailey for embezzlement, it was alleged that a large amount of money embezzled had been sent to his wife. They eventually gave up the bungalow, The Laurels, and it was sold for the benefit of people from whom it was alleged Harrison had embezzled money. Dealing with what had occurred on the night of February the 4th, Jackson in his statement said he had gone to bed at about 8 p.m., the little girl Betty being asleep in her cot in the same room. He partially undressed and read a book. A little time later, he heard a funny noise, but thought it was only neighbours quarrelling. He then heard a thud and the dog rushed out of the bedroom barking. He went outside and found his wife injured and leaning partly against the back door. Mrs. Dimmock came along and helped him to get her indoors, and later he went to the house of Captain Phillips to telephone for the doctor. Statements of neighbours. Mr. Paling compared the statements of other residents in Limeslade as to what had happened, and said the statements of Mrs. Dimmock would be that the assault took place at about 10 o'clock. At 10 o'clock she had parted with Mrs. Jackson at the gate, and a few minutes after getting indoors she heard a scream and took no notice. A few seconds later she heard a second scream and rushed out and around the fence and found Mrs. Jackson lying on the ground outside her back door. It was plain that the attack took place at about 10 o'clock. Mrs. Gammon, another neighbour, said that about 10 o'clock she was in bed and heard some muffled screams. A man who was getting some coal out of the shed at 10 o'clock also heard the screams. The police theory. The conclusions we come to, said Mr. Paling, are that Mrs. Jackson arrived at home and went indoors and took off her coat, which, as you will see, is of a non-sleeve variety. She was then attacked by someone with a tire lever. She screamed and the assailant picked up her coat and threw it over her head, either to deaden her screams or stop her struggles. She then staggered outside and collapsed on the pathway. The condition of the coat and the circumstances surrounding this case are entirely consistent with that theory. The cuts on the coat, the bloodstains, everything in fact corresponds. There was the prisoner and the little girl Betty, who is 6 years of age, who was asleep in her cot at the bungalow at the time. The prisoner was awakened, according to his own story, with lights burning in the bedroom and living room. There was no one apart from the child in the house. There was no evidence of strangers in the locality or around the bungalow. I think it most unlikely that it would have been possible for an unknown assailant to have been lurking in the neighbourhood. Screams were said by people who heard them to have lasted some minutes. Jackson, according to his own story, directly he heard the screams, jumped out of bed and rushed to the back and found his wife just outside the back door. That would not have taken more than a moment. He rushed out just as he was, but saw no one and heard no one. Actions very peculiar. Jackson's story and actions were very peculiar, but I don't think they are consistent with those of an innocent man. He delayed 3/4 of an hour before telephoning for a doctor and failed to communicate with the police. When Mrs. Gammon comes to help, she is more or less sent away. He made contradictory statements to the police about the tire lever, which was found in a most unusual place under a cushion. Mr. Paling continued that it was no part of the prosecution's duty to suggest motives, and they did not intend to do so. They knew, however, that Jackson was not living very happily with his wife, and that fact may have been the cause for the assault. Jackson, in his statement, had made out that his wife was a woman of mystery. There is no mystery about her, declared Mr. Paling. Her maiden name was Kate Atkinson, and she was born on July the 28th, 1885, near Lancaster in Lancashire, and was the daughter of a labourer. Jackson says he did not know who his wife was. This seems an absurd story in view of the fact that the woman's birth certificate and marriage certificate were found by the police in an unlocked drawer in the couple's bedroom. The woman had been receiving considerable sums of money from a man named Harrison, who was convicted on March the 30th, 1927, at the Central Criminal Court for fraudulent conversion, and received a sentence of 5 years penal servitude. Income of £20 a week. With the money which she received from Harrison, which varied sometimes but averaged at about £20 a week, the woman kept herself and her husband. They lived in a bungalow of some size at Limeslade, which they moved into 3 or 4 years ago, but after Harrison's conviction the income ceased, and the bungalow was sold, and the money was returned to the people who were defrauded by Harrison. Harrison, continued Mr. Paling, was convicted of fraudulent conversion of £20,000. The bungalow and the effects realised just over £1,000. Jackson, as a result, had for the first time for many years to go out and do some work to keep his wife, and they had to live in a less pretentious bungalow, a small, poky place. Life was naturally much more unpleasant for Jackson, commented Mr. Paling, and we cannot trace where he did his last honest work. Neighbour's story. There was a quickening of interest when Mr. Paling called Mrs. Dimmock, and a tall, dark woman entered the witness box. Olive Maria Dimmock said that she was the wife of an engineer and lived at Webbernsfield, Limeslade. Usually on a Monday evening she and Mrs. Jackson used to visit a cinema at the Mumbles together. They left together at about 6 o'clock on February the 4th and visited Mumbles Cinema. They left when the performance was over at about 9:30 and went straight home. They parted at their respective gates and she entered her house. She spoke to her husband and went into the bedroom to take off her hat and coat, and while there she heard screams. The screams were repeated, and because she thought she could recognise Mrs. Jackson's voice, she ran out to see what the matter was. Approaching the Jacksons' back door, she saw Mrs. Jackson on the ground and Mr. Jackson trying to lift her up. Jackson's defence. In general, Jackson was seen to have handled himself well in court under cross-examination. He denied any knowledge of the crime. He contended that he believed his wife was in danger from an unknown protagonist and stated how stupid he felt that he had thought that the neighbour could offer his wife any kind of protection. Jackson remained adamant that he knew nothing of the crime, but that he assumed it was the unknown terror that his wife feared. The jury believed him. After a discussion of some 30 minutes, the jury came back with a verdict of not guilty. Jackson was released and the case was never officially solved. Loose ends. From this convoluted case, several discoveries from Scotland Yard came out. Kate Jackson was indeed Kate Atkinson, daughter of a farm labourer who had made her escape to London in hopes of success on the stage. Instead, she began an affair that changed to blackmail with George Harrison. She had indeed had a relationship with Leopold de Gries, who was a French portrait painter. He had a son from a previous marriage. Whilst in a relationship with him, she called herself Molly Le Gris. He contended that she was not well educated and did not speak several languages. As for other possible scams being run by Kate, other than Kate being a consummate liar regarding her history, her career, and her background, nothing was proven of her scamming anyone else. The case and the intense interest generated by the shadowy Madam X faded. and the crime and murderer remain a mystery.
Case 7. The Margate Hotel Murder. The sinister schemes of Sidney Fox in 1929. When a tragic hotel fire claimed the life of widowed Rosalind Fox, few suspected anything more than misadventure. But behind the smoke and sorrow lay a chilling plot. Her son, Sidney Fox, a serial fraudster with a trail of false checks, stolen identities, and hotel room swindles, had taken out £8,000 in life assurance just one day before the blaze. In this gripping true crime episode, we follow the relentless investigation that unravelled a long career of deception, a suspicious will leaving a single farthing to one son, and a shocking revelation by forensic legend Sir Bernard Spilsbury. As the drama unfolds in courtroom and press, the case of Room 66 would shock the nation and end in the ultimate sentence. Was this a desperate act by a charming con man, or a premeditated murder cloaked in family tragedy?
Background. Sidney Fox was born in 1899, one of 4 sons. The father left the family when Sidney was young. 2 of the sons died in the war. The eldest son, William, seems to have remained estranged from his family. Sidney and his mother Rosalind seem to have a history of petty theft, mostly through the cashing of fraudulent cheques. With Rosalind's pitiful pension of 18 shillings per week, it would seem a life of crime was her only option to attempt to live a lifestyle they both craved. From the London Chronicle, the 22nd of March 1930, Career of Crime. Fox many times in the hands of the police. The whole history of Sidney Harry Fox and his several aliases was revealed. According to criminal records, Fox, who is aged 31, was born at Great Frensham in Norfolk and went to the parish school. At 13, he embarked on a career of fraud and deceit, which culminated in a series of swindles and forgeries that forced him into the desperate corner with a desperate issue. While he was still only 13, he was convicted of making a fraudulent collection for charity and was birched at East Dereham. As a youth, he obtained a post in a bank and committed a series of forgeries. He was given the option of prosecution or military service. He chose the latter, and while in a military hospital, he stole a chequebook and induced several tradesmen to cash cheques which he forged in the name of an officer. He was arrested and sentenced to 3 months' imprisonment. After his discharge from the army, he obtained a post in a bank in Whitehall, where he stole nearly £400 by ordering chequebooks for clients and then forging cheques and drawing money. He was sentenced at the Old Bailey to 8 months' imprisonment in October 1918. In 1920, he was sentenced to 9 months at Westminster Police Court for stealing goods by ordering them from a West End store and having them charged to customers' accounts. In 1922, he was sentenced to 12 months' imprisonment for staying at a fashionable West End hotel as a man of means, as evidence of which he placed a registered letter in the safe. He forged another cheque in the name of an officer and was sentenced to 12 months at West London Police Court in 1924. At the Hampshire Assizes, He was charged with the theft of jewellery from a furnished flat and was sentenced to 18 months imprisonment in March 1928. At times, he has posed as an old Etonian and as an RAF officer. Fox's brushes with the law and lack of funds led Sidney and his mother to stay at hotel after hotel just out of the reach of local police. Generally, they followed the same plan at each place they stayed. Sidney would hand over an important sealed envelope for the desk to hold on to. They arrived without luggage, explaining that their luggage was on the way from their prior travels. The couple would run up debts, whilst Sidney simultaneously would attempt to cash a number of fraudulent cheques within the hotel and around the town. Then, after a week or so, they, mother and son, would leave and make their way to the next place. The event. The unexpected fire at the Metropole Hotel caused an uproar in the seaside town of Margate. From the London Daily Chronicle on the 5th of November 1929, alleged unpaid bill after fatal fire, mother's death. 2 days after the tragic death of his mother, Mrs. Rosalind Fox, in a fire in the Hotel Metropole in Margate, Sidney Harry Fox left this town. Yesterday he was brought back under police escort, having been arrested at Norwich, and today, before the magistrates, was charged with fraudulently obtaining credit from the hotel to the value of £12 14. It was stated that he stayed at the hotel from October the 16th to October the 25th and left without paying his bill. Only evidence of arrest was given, and he was remanded in custody for 8 days. Fox and his mother arrived at the hotel on October the 16th from France and Belgium, where they had been visiting the graves of 2 other sons of Mrs. Fox, who were killed in the war. Mrs. Fox, a widow of 63, then gave her address as End View, Lyndhurst in Hampshire. Inquest evidence. Fox said at the inquest on his mother that his address had been Cathedral Close, Norwich, but in future he would live at Lyndhurst. He told the coroner that shortly after retiring to bed on the night of October the 23rd, he smelt smoke, and on going to his mother's room, which adjoined his, he was overwhelmed with volumes of smoke. He rushed down the stairs, calling out, "Fire!" and was met by Mr. Hopkins, a commercial traveller who rescued Mrs. Fox. Mr. Hopkins of Matlock Road in Leighton told the coroner that when he attempted to enter the room he was twice beaten back by smoke. Then he crawled in on his hands and knees and dragged Mrs. Fox into the corridor. Artificial respiration was applied, but she died shortly afterwards. Chief Officer Hammond of the Margate Fire Brigade gave it as his theory that Mrs. Fox had left some of her clothes near the gas fire and that, catching a light, they had smouldered until the room was filled with smoke and she was suffocated. Interestingly, Fox had insured his mother just the day before the unexpected fire. In fact, within days it became evident that impoverished Rosalind Fox had life insurance policies placed against her with a total value of £8,000. One of the insurance inspectors, a former retired policeman now working for the insurance company, arrived to inspect the room and became immediately suspicious. He believed the fire to have been started by some newspapers placed under a chair within her room. He contacted Scotland Yard of his suspicions, whilst sending a telegram back to his company stating extremely muddy waters, thereby halting any kind of payout to Fox. From the London Daily Chronicle on the 22nd of March 1930, Sherlock Holmes' work, ex-policeman's investigation into the hotel room. Sidney Fox would probably never have been brought to justice, and there would have been no suspicion on his mother having been murdered, but for the detective abilities of an ex-policeman employed as an insurance official. Every known circumstance at the time suggested that Mrs. Fox had died as the result of the fire in her room at the hotel at Margate. At the inquest, the jury returned a verdict of death by misadventure, and Mrs. Fox was buried in her parents' grave at Great Frensham. Then one of the companies with whom Fox had insured his mother's life for £3,000 began to make inquiries before paying the claim. An ex-policeman who had been employed as a detective in the Metropolitan Police Force was appointed as investigator. He discovered that Fox always insured his mother when she was about to take a railway journey. This and his claims for £3,000 worth of insurance following his brother's death at Margate prompted the closest inquiries. Burnt chair clue. The ex-policeman visited the hotel and examined Mrs. Fox's bedroom minutely. Burns on a chair suggested that the fire had started under the chair. This discovery was communicated by the insurance firm whom the ex-policeman represented to Scotland Yard, who then began their inquiries. On instructions from the Home Office, the body was exhumed, and as a result of an examination by Sir Bernard Spilsbury, the police formed the theory that Mrs. Fox had been murdered. Someone recollected having seen a charred newspaper in room 66 just after the fire was discovered. At the request of the police, a Margate rubbish dump was raked by a number of men, and beneath a ton of chalk and refuse was found a charred newspaper which was used at the trial as an important piece of evidence. Following this discovery, Fox was arrested. Scotland Yard were interested and sent 2 investigators. From the London Daily Chronicle, the 6th of November 1929, Scotland Yard asked to probe the Margate mystery. Widow who lost her life in a midnight fire. Hotel drama. There was a sensational development last night following inquiries by the Margate police into the death of Mrs. Rosalind Fox, who lost her life in a fire at the Hotel Metropole in Margate on the night of October the 23rd. Information which has come into the possession of the local police was so important that it was decided to ask for the assistance of Scotland Yard. The Chief Constable of Margate visited Scotland Yard yesterday morning, and last evening Chief Inspector Hambrook, head of Scotland Yard's flying squad, and Detective Sergeant Ato left for Margate to take charge of the inquiries. The 2 officers reached Margate shortly after 1 o'clock and had a preliminary conference with the Chief Constable. Today, the subject of their inquiry will be discussed at length and a thorough investigation begun. Scotland Yard begin by attempting to trace the antecedents of Mrs. Rosalind Fox and her son Sidney. What emerges is a trail of travels and deceits. From the London Daily Chronicle, the 8th of November 1929, Margate mystery, new disclosures. Widow's body may be exhumed tomorrow. Life in 8 towns. Movements traced. Exhumation has been decided upon to facilitate investigations, the police believing it essential that every line of inquiry should be followed simultaneously. The further, Chief Inspector Hambrook delves into the mass of information pouring into the office set aside for him in the local police station. The more mysterious becomes the whole affair. The movements of the dead woman before she came to Margate on October the 16th have been traced to no less than 8 towns. These are Canterbury, Dover, Folkestone, Norwich, Colchester, Herne Bay, Southsea, and London. It has also been found that her visit to Margate last month was the second this year. She and her son were there for a few days in August when they stayed at a private house. Their wanderings. The wanderings of both mother and son have been carefully checked, and the police have important data as far back as June. They have not, however, been able to trace her travels on the continent. It is known that between June and October she stayed at hotels in each of the towns mentioned, with the exception of London. But in none of these towns, so far as people are aware, was it necessary for her to receive medical attention. This was not necessary until she came to Margate. Mrs. Fox arrived on the Wednesday, an invalid, and on the Sunday she fainted. It was then that a doctor was called in. Throughout the 8 days she lived in the hotel, she was incapable of movement without assistance. When her son was not available to assist her up and down the stairs, she was helped by one of the hotel's staff. She was gay despite her infirmity. It was interesting to note that Mrs. Fox had previously been healthy and independent, but only began to fail when they arrived in Margate. The information pointed a finger to her son, Sidney. Whilst investigations are being pursued, Sidney is held on numerous fraud charges. The Home Office becomes interested in the death of Mrs. Fox, and Sir Bernard Spilsbury is called in to do a post-mortem on the now exhumed body of Mrs. Rosalind Fox. Sidney Fox is charged with his mother's murder, and the case goes to trial. From the London Daily Chronicle, the 18th of January 1929, Room 66, Mystery Sensation. Mrs. Fox strangled, says counsel. Life insured for £3,000. In the opinion of Sir Bernard Spilsbury, Mrs. Fox died from asphyxiation by the hand. The facts all point to Fox as the man who murdered his mother. With these dramatic statements, Mr. Sefton Cohen yesterday opened the case for the prosecution when Sidney Harry Fox, aged 28, was charged before the Margate magistrates with the murder of his mother, Mrs. Rosalind Fox, who was found dead in room 66 at a Margate hotel. At the time of her death, Mr. Sefton Cohen pointed out, Mrs. Fox was insured for £3,000 by her son. This sum is later adjusted to £8,000 as more insurance policies on her life come to light. Red globe in a room. The court was held in the council chamber of the town hall, a large wooden dock on rubber-tired wheels being brought in to accommodate the prisoner. By the time the doors were open, a crowd of about 300 was waiting, a large proportion of the queue being composed of women and girls. In the court, people stood 6 or 7 deep, standing on tiptoe to get a glimpse of Fox. To the formal charge of murder, Mr. G. E. Hindle, on Fox's behalf, pleaded not guilty. Mr. Sefton Cohen, for the Director of Public Prosecutions, then began his statement, which took over 70 minutes. He dramatically described the discovery of the tragedy. Midnight drama. Shortly before midnight, he said, on October the 23rd last, Fox, who had been staying with his mother at the Metropole Hotel in Margate, ran downstairs from the first floor shouting for help. He said that he believed there was a fire and that his mother was upstairs. From his attire, which was a shirt only, it appeared that he had just left bed. Visitors staying at the hotel ran upstairs to the first floor and were led by Fox into his own room, number 67, which was full of smoke. Then into room 66. This room was also full of smoke. One of the visitors, Mr. Hopkins, having tied a handkerchief over his mouth, very pluckily entered the room on his hands and knees, and in the darkness, for the only light there was in the room appeared to come from a red globe on the opposite side of the room, he came upon the legs of a woman hanging over the side of the bed. He dragged the woman off the bed into the corridor, where it was seen that she was apparently lifeless. Fox's story of tragedy. There were no signs of the body having been touched by the fire, and there was no physical marks of any injury. There were no teeth in the mouth. The smoke had apparently come from the carpet, which was burning under the large armchair standing to the right of the gas stove. The chair itself was burning underneath. Inspector Palmer saw Fox in his bedroom and asked if he could give an account of what had taken place. His mother, said Fox, retired at about 6. She asked for the evening paper, and he gave it to her. He then went on to say, I lit the gas fire and asked if I should wait to turn out the light. She said, no, that would be all right. I retired at about 8 o'clock and went to sleep. I was aroused about 11:30 by what I thought was a window rattling. I got up and noticed a smell of fire and went to her room to see if it came from there. I found the room full of smoke. I saw a light near where the gas stove would be, and I entered the room but was beaten back by smoke. Mr. Sefton Cohen continued that, at the request, a verdict was returned that death was due to suffocation from fire or from shock. The body of Mrs. Fox was buried at Great Frensham in Norfolk. On November the 9th, however, as a result of certain information which came to the knowledge of the police, it was exhumed, and Sir Bernard Spilsbury had made a very careful examination. Sir Bernard found recent injuries to the deeper tissues of the neck and tongue, which were not visible on external examination at all. From the absence of any indication of soot in the inner surface of the air passages, and from the absence of carbon monoxide in the blood, Sir Bernard is of the opinion that death was not the result of the effects of fire, and further that this woman died very soon after the fire had started, if not before. The injuries to the tongue which he found could, in his opinion, only be caused by the larynx being forcibly pressed upwards in the act of throttling at a time when the woman was wearing her dental plates. The injuries to the neck and tongue, in conjunction with other conditions which he found, could, in his opinion, only be accounted for as a result of manual strangulation. For Bernard Spilsbury will tell you, continued Mr. Sefton Cohen, that, in his opinion, death in this woman was due to asphyxiation caused by strangulation by the hand. You can dismiss any possibility of accident. In regard to the possibility of suicide, not only is there no evidence that she had suicidal tendencies, but in the case of strangulation by the hands, all power and grip would be lost when the compression of the windpipe commenced. There remains the third method by which the woman could have come to her death: strangulation at the hands of some assailant. The submission of the prosecution is that the facts all point inevitably to the accused as the man who murdered his mother. Counsel's challenge: deliberate and carefully planned murder. The case against Fox is that he has committed a deliberate and carefully planned murder, continued counsel. Mr. Sefton Cohen proceeded to outline the movements of Mrs. Fox and her son on their arrival in Margate. In conversation with the manager of the hotel on October the 18th, he said Fox asked him whether he could recommend a good solicitor for insurance. On October the 20th, Fox appeared disturbed about the health of his mother and spoke to the manager. Dr. Austin was sent for and found that there seemed to be nothing much the matter with Mrs. Fox, and he gave her a prescription for a tonic. Prescriptions dangerous. On October the 21st, Fox purchased a second bottle of tonic and made a very odd statement to one of the clerks at the hotel. He came back with this medicine and said that the chemist had told him that doctors' prescriptions were sometimes very dangerous, as they prescribed excessive amount of drugs, and that in this case the chemist had broken down the prescription which had been given him by Dr. Austin. You will hear from witnesses from the chemist that no such statement was made by them, and that the tonic was made up according to the prescription. Half bottle of port. Mr. Sefton Cohen said that the suggestion of the prosecution was that at this time Fox was in desperate need for money. Towards the end of the previous month he had had about £4 in notes, but it was clear that this had disappeared before October the 21st. In his original statement, he failed to make any mention of the fact that at 9:30 that evening he purchased half a bottle of port. An empty bottle was found in the cupboard of his bedroom after the fire, and the lead foil cap and tissue paper cover were found concealed behind a gas fire in Mrs. Fox's bedroom. When Dr. Roche Lynch is called, continued counsel, he will tell you that as a result of his analysis of the organs of this woman, he found traces of a moderate amount of alcohol, which had been taken probably within an hour of her death. After buying this half bottle of port, Fox went to the saloon bar at the hotel, where he remained until 10:25 p.m., having one or two drinks. He was seen by the night porter going up to his room at about 10:40 p.m. About an hour later he gave the alarm of fire, and it was Mr. Hopkins and the other visitors to the hotel who found the body and dragged it out of the room and extinguished the fire, and not Fox. That is, again, a somewhat singular piece of conduct. Life insured on the previous day, total of £3,000, payable in event of accidental death. Another curious thing about Fox's statements to the inspector, continued counsel, is that he makes no mention of the fact that he had on the previous day insured his mother's life against accident. Mr. Sefton Cohen said that on October the 22nd, Fox called at the head office in London of Messrs. Pickford Limited and filled in a form for a policy with the Ocean Accident Guarantee Corporation for accident insurance for tourists and travellers. This proposal form was for his mother, and this particular policy is generally taken out for 1 day only, its purpose being to cover journeys by rail or otherwise by the injured person. By the payment of a premium of 2 shillings, cover could be obtained for accidents involving loss of life, in which case compensation payable was £1,000 for loss of life and loss of one limb £500. Policy extended. Having filled in this proposal form, Fox asked the clerk to make out an insurance policy to cover the full day of October the 23rd up to midnight. On the afternoon of October the 22nd, Fox called at 31 Berry Street in London the offices of the Cornhill Insurance Company, where his mother had been insured against accidents on and off by accused since October the 10th last, for a sum of £2,000 in case of death, and lesser sums in the event of accidents. He asked whether the policy could be extended up to October the 23rd. He called back later and was handed an endorsement of this policy extending the cover to midnight on October the 23rd. There was in existence a third policy in respect of Mrs. Fox. This was for £10 and had been taken out in the Wesleyan and General Insurance Company as long ago as 1913. Each of these companies received within a short time of the death of Mrs. Fox a claim by a solicitor acting on behalf of Fox. Question of motive. What is the explanation of all these insurances against accident taken out by Fox in respect of his mother? Asked Mr. Sefton Cohen. It may be that you will be of an opinion that they are consistent with a perfectly innocent motive, but it may be that you may think that he first expected it was probably that some accident would happen to her, and that as time went he decided to take the matter into his own hands. It is for you to consider whether in the case of this man there is not a strong motive in the sum of £3,000 payable at a stated time on the accidental death of Rosalind Fox. This man, who had no occupation and who had expensive tastes for a man in his position, and no means to gratify them, except the joint pensions of his mother and himself, which amounted to 18 shillings a week. During the trial, Fox had a further 6 charges of fraud placed against him from cheques written in Margate and in Folkestone. As the trial progresses, gripping the national papers, the eldest son is called to give evidence. From the London Daily Chronicle, the 17th of March, 1930. Mrs. Fox's will story. Document leaving farthing to one of her sons. A will said to have been made by Mrs. Fox, the victim of the Room 66 tragedy at the Hotel Metropole in Margate, was read at Lewes Assizes on Saturday, when the trial of Sidney Harry Fox for the alleged murder of his mother was continued. Nearly all Mrs. Fox's property was left to the accused man, and the will added, "To my son William Edward Fox, I leave the sum of 1 farthing, and sincerely hope he will never want his mother." William Edward Fox went into the witness box and said the body of the document was in his brother Sidney's handwriting. Fox apparently believed to the end that he would be found innocent. He was not. From the London Daily Chronicle, the 22nd of March 1930. Death sentence on Fox. How insurance company found the vital clue. His long career of crime. In a tense silence yesterday, the curtain fell on the long, drawn-out drama of the mystery of Room 66, when Sidney Harry Fox was sentenced to death for the murder of his mother. Thus came to an end one of the strangest cases in the records of crime. The first clue to the crime was discovered by the investigations of an insurance official. To the last, Fox protested his complete innocence. It is now disclosed that Fox had a criminal record which began at the age of 13. "I am innocent," Fox's last words before leaving the court. "My lord, I did not murder my mother. I am innocent." Sidney Fox made this last dispassionate protest of innocence as he stared transfixed at the grim black cap today. There was no tremor in his voice, just the frenzied accents of despair. Then he turned abruptly and descended the steps to the cells. Mr. Justice Rowlatt, obviously affected, wiped his glasses tremulously and hastily removed the cap. It was his first murder trial. Tense moment. And so closes one of the grimmest and most complicated trials in criminal history. Lewis Assizes has seen many famous murder trials, Mahone, Thorne, and others, but even they were less strange than this trial, upon which were fixed the questioning eyes of every son or daughter who had loved a mother, and of every parent who has looked for love from their children, of every man and woman horrified by the cold, calculated murder of a helpless mother. Fox sentenced. There has probably never been a tenser moment in any court than when the jury filed back into the box this afternoon. The court was chilled with expectation. The scared eyes of the man in the dock searched the faces of each juryman as he filed in, and after an absence of an hour and 40 minutes, pale and drawn, some with tears on their cheeks, they avoided that look, and their concern was so unmistakable that before the fatal question was asked, a whisper went round the court. "Guilty." Fox heard it. He swayed slightly and braced himself. "Members of the jury, what is your verdict?" The foreman pulled himself slowly to his feet, and in that pause the vastness of eternity spread out before Sidney Fox. "Guilty, my lord." Fox glanced up quickly at the judge with a momentary flash of despair. Mr. Justice Rowlatt fumbled for a moment with the black cap, which he was to wear for the first time in his career. Fox's jaw sagged. His sallow face went ashy pale. His defiance had disappeared. "Have you anything to say why the sentence of death should not be passed upon you?" Word of doom. Fox did not answer. He stood rigid with his hands clasped before him as if he were manacled. He licked his dry lips. The judge in a low voice repeated the dread sentence. As the words of doom, Fox's head fell forward limply onto his breast. But at the grim amen he raised it again, his lips trembling, his jaw rigid as he made his dramatic plea of innocence. "I did not murder my mother." A woman sobbed in the gallery. A man sagged limply in his seat, faint with strain. Then Fox turned on his heel at the tap of the warder's hand. He lowered his head again and added in an almost inaudible voice, "I am innocent." He went slowly down the steps to the cell in silence. His emotion, which had had full vent during the day, was stunned by the verdict, which he had resolutely refused to expect. As he sat in his cell, quiet and speechless, while arrangements were made to move him to Maidstone prison to await the carrying out of the sentence. Collapse at last. After half an hour, the warder tapped him on the shoulder. He shook himself, shrugged his shoulders, and walked stolidly to the side entrance of the prison, into the glorious sunshine and into the shuttered car. Then, and only then, did he give way to his feelings, and as he collapsed into the seat he burst into sobs. His confidence had grown throughout the morning, while the judge, with his steel-rimmed glasses, kindly face, and ready smile, had carefully set out the evidence for and against, weighing one against the other, stressing this point, dismissing that, punctuating his speech with an apologetic little laugh as he laboured some point. But the nerve strain on Fox found violent reaction when the jury retired, and he was escorted to the cells for a meal. He ate little and gave way to tears and sobbing. When the jury's return was announced, he remarked, "It's all right. I'll be acquitted." Throughout the whole trial he was quite certain that he could never be convicted on the evidence. He had eaten well, but had slept irregularly, especially during the last few days when he was the only prisoner in Lewes jail. To everyone throughout the whole proceedings he proclaimed his innocence. "I loved her very much," he declared repeatedly. "I would never have hurt anyone, at least of all her." Whilst in prison for the murder of his mother, more information arose regarding a possible murder attempt on a Mrs. Morse, from whom he had stolen jewellery and insured her life. But this charge is not pursued, so can only remain speculative. The standard appeal to the Home Office is made for his death sentence to be commuted to life in prison. The Home Office actually sent a team to visit Fox in prison regarding his mental stability. They concluded that Fox is sane and the sentence will remain. Sidney Fox, sentenced to death for the murder of his mother, was executed at Maidstone Jail on the 8th of April 1930.
And there you have it. Murders, mysteries, missing mothers and more life insurance than is frankly comforting. If you've enjoyed this unsettling stroll through Britain's darker corners, don't worry. We'll be back next month with even more suspicious seaside holidays, eyebrows-raising wills, and crimes committed with absolutely no thought to subtlety. Until then, lock the doors, hide the checkbook, and if anyone offers you tonic and a half bottle of port, maybe just say no. Thanks for listening and staying curious. This has been News of the Times, and I am Robin Coles, specialist in candle-lit confusion and fellow of the Royal Institute of Slightly Suspicious Clanks in the Night.